to the Kent Lapp Podcast.
Barnabas Piper, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time, man. Really appreciate it. You watched that vice president debate last night?
Nope. I make special note of when there are political debates, and then I don't watch TV.
Stay away?
Yeah.
Did you watch the first presidential debate?
Nope. Falls under the same category. I have to decide what's good for my soul and my mind, and usually I take about a 5-second look at Twitter and think I made the right decision. At least for me. I
think so. I mean, look, if it's not of particular interest, I mean, to be quite honest, if I didn't feel a sense of obligation or interest in keeping up, with those types of things, including like for this podcast, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily watch it. It's not like it's a good pastime.
Yeah, I feel like there may have been a time when political debates were informative. I feel like mostly now it's a caricaturization. That's a lot of syllables. Of two extremes that doesn't offer a lot in the way of, there's some nuanced policy stuff here.
Right.
There's something that's informative about who these candidates are as in character or anything. It just kind of feels like, this is just Twitter in person. A lot of shouting, a lot of interrupting, etc.
Yeah, that's exactly what the presidential debate was. I think the worst thing you could say about the presidential debate a couple weeks ago was that my 10-year-old and 8-year-old son were fascinated and they didn't want to go to bed. You know what I mean? Like a presidential debate should be boring. You know? Like it should be, your 8-year-old should be like, can we watch YouTube right now? And they were fascinated by a little embarrassingly so.
I think it was maybe the 2000 election. There was a presidential election in 2000. That's right. Yeah. Check my math. So I would have been mid high school, and I remember my dad wanted me to watch it. And I made it about 15 minutes in and was just pleading to be excused.
It should be so boring.
Yeah.
But you did you watch it last night, Andrew?
I did not.
Okay. So last night I thought it was pretty good. It was
in terms of the content or the behavior or both?
Both.
Okay.
The whole thing. I mean, I was like watching it, and it occurred to me probably like 5 or 10 minutes in. Here's what occurred to me. Is there any way we can get Pence to slide in as president and Kamala Harris to slide in as vice president?
I saw you post
Just
that,
put
I think,
the
on
two
Instagram
of them in the
something.
White House and have them go run it. Now, to be fair, I don't know that much about Kamala Harris, and also, to be fair, I don't even know that much about Pence. But it's impressive to me the way that they could communicate their points in like 2 minutes and not have a bunch of ahs and ums and stuttering and let me think about this. Like, they really communicated their points honestly really well, and it's like on the spot. And apparently they don't know the questions ahead of time, so they're just going for it. And were both articulate. They were both very calm. Like, you could see, like, even with Kamala Harris, like, she hasn't done this before at this level.
Not yet.
And
not like
she
this.
was just composed. And I think, my understanding is, I know enough that, you have Pence, which is on the more conservative side, and Harris, which is on the more progressive side. A combination like that wouldn't be all that bad in the White House.
Yeah, I don't disagree, because bipartisanship sounds really nice. Wouldn't it be nice if we weren't all automatically enemies by political party? But it also sounds utterly idealistic.
Oh, it's
from where we are right now.
Well, for sure. And then you have people on both sides that aren't going to let that happen. Like, Trump's not going to, obviously.
Right.
This goes without saying, but neither is Biden. Like, it's all about them. You know what I mean?
And neither will the parties, because it seems to me that both political parties have devolved to the point of they exist for their own self-preservation rather than having a collective sense of what's best for the country.
Well, that's 100% accurate, and it's 100% scary.
Yeah.
Because that's where we're at now. It's all about the parties.
Yeah.
And they put forth, that's something that I didn't really fully grasp until more recently. They put forth someone who has the best chance of winning for the sake of their party. It doesn't necessarily mean the person they're putting forth is the best person around the country.
Right.
It has the best chance of winning for the sake of their party, so that they can impose their views on America. It's pretty weird.
It's also how somebody like Donald Trump, who hasn't been a political figure up until 15, 16, leading into the 2016 election.
Yep.
He ran for president I don't even know if that was like if he intended to win or if he intended to do something for publicity, and he attached himself to a party and the party selected him because he had the best chance to win. I think he could have just as easily done the same thing on the Democratic side, because I don't know that I just mean in terms of like how he would have been responded to by a party.
I agree with that.
I don't know. I don't think Democrats would have voted for him, so that might not have worked as well. But just in terms of, I don't think he's a politically loyal party man.
No.
I think
agree.
he's an opportunist.
Exactly.
And the Republicans presented the opportunity, and now they are married to him.
Yes.
So they have to support him throughout.
100%. Yeah, for sure. That's an interesting idea. Is what if Trump would have ran as a Democrat in 2016? Because pre-2016, well, pre the decision to run, so now we're going back to 14 or whenever it would be. Like, was there enough known about Trump and his values and how he operated to really assign him to a party? I would still think probably more Republican, just because that tends to be the more business-friendly, tax-friendly party.
Yeah.
So maybe that's just a natural.
And, at the risk of getting controversial, I think there were things about him that were well enough known that the Democratic Party tends to be more supported by minorities in America.
That's right.
And there were things about him that were known as not favorable in the minority community. So that I think probably still would have pigeonholed him into the Republicans. Yeah. My point earlier was simply just sort of the opportunist. I don't think he cared. I think he was just looking for the opportunity.
Yes, I agree with that. Well, I will say this. You guys missed a good debate last night. It was well-reasoned. They came out, conducted themselves in a respectful manner. Both of them. Both of them would be, the way they conducted themselves in that hour and a half last night, it would be, if my 10-year-old and 8-year-old were watching, which they weren't, you could learn from that, and you could take that as a bit of an example. And I just thought they both communicated their thoughts extremely well. And I wasn't surprised either, because with the backlash from the presidential debate and how just crazy that was, this did not surprise me, both because it's obviously the VPs, but also as like a reaction to the way the first one went. I figured that's how it would play out, and it really did. I was fairly impressed by it, to be honest. Yeah,
it makes me a little sad that we have to lead talking about a vice presidential debate by saying they behaved themselves.
Right.
You'd like that to be like, that's what you hear from the babysitter.
Yeah.
Your kids behave themselves. Good. That's what we were going for.
Yes.
I would like the leaders of America to start like that. I feel like that should be a baseline.
It should be. Yeah, for sure. Andrew, your mic on over there? Cool. Welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here.
This is one of his first episodes.
I feel honored to be on one of Andrew's first episodes.
Right?
It feels good to be with Barnabas and Kent as well.
How good does it feel to be married finally, Andrew?
It was an adjustment, but it was all wonderful adjustments in every wonderful way.
I think it'll continue to be an adjustment.
Probably,
Oh, yeah.
But it's great though. Marriage is really good. Mm-hmm. How what are you learning since you have been director for community at Immanuel, Barnabas? And by the way, thank you for doing that.
Oh man, I love it.
I mean, you were in a good position, and I was pumped when I first heard about the possibility of you helping out more, coming on board, all of that. Mm-hmm. And thank you for serving the church so well, man. I mean, honestly, and I hate when people say, and I'm not just saying that, because it's like, well, would you ever just say something? So it's like, that's not something that needs to really be prefaced, but you are doing a really good job, man. I mean, I hear that from multiple people.
Well, that's encouraging.
Thank you for serving the church so well. And I'm curious, what are you learning?
Oh man, it feels like it has. So I've been on just over a year now. I started August of 19, and it feels like it has been a roller coaster on the one hand, just because 2020 has been for everybody, but also a pretty significant learning curve. Because I came on a month before the pastoral transition. So when Ray retired and TJ took over as lead pastor.
You were on before Ray retired?
For about 1 month. Yeah, so I came on August 1st, and then Ray officially left at the beginning of September.
Yeah.
And it was a great month, just because on his way out, Ray basically was just, here's my picture of pastoral wisdom, and I'm just going to dump it all over you guys. And boy, what a great first month.
Staff meeting,
the meetings with the pastors, just kind of sitting in on just kind of getting called into offices. And yeah, he just was, he's always generous, but generous with his wisdom and his time. And yeah, it was a great starting point. But also I knew coming on that my long-term lead pastor would be TJ. So I joined staff with an eye towards what will it be like to serve alongside and under the leadership of TJ, and had real just profound confidence that was going to be great, and that has played out. So he's been great to work under. I think the first big adjustment, so the first big thing I had to learn was how to measure success in ministry, because I'd been in publishing prior for basically since 2005, couple of different aspects to that here and there, some digital sides of things, some marketing, things like that. But success there is numeric. It's all numeric. So it's sales, it's revenue, it's customers, it's email lists, it's conversion rates, it's just down the line. Almost none of which applies to church, especially not when you're talking about small groups, discipleship groups. There are numbers involved, but if we have 100 discipleship groups and they're really badly run,
right.
I failed.
Yeah.
If we have 30 discipleship groups and they're thriving, that's success. But what is thriving? How do we measure that? So even how to spend time. When everything is numeric based, you can kind of measure your day by the urgent tasks are the one that have the greatest effect on the bottom line, ultimately. Well, what's the bottom line of church? It kind of varies. Some days the urgent thing is the person who calls and says, hey, I really need to meet with you about whatever crisis in life. Some days it's, I have to get this email out so that the information gets to the right people so that they show up at the right event or whatever. And it probably took me, right up until about the beginning of COVID, to start to get comfortable with the idea that success isn't really measurable other than in things like faithfulness, availability, and it's a little bit more like success as a doctor. Like if a doctor had maximum success, he would be less busy. And this, people would just not need to come as much. There's a sense of that as well.
Interesting.
But because of sin in the world, I will always have a job.
Sure.
And so there's success is health. Spiritual health, relational health. How are the groups doing? Are the groups multiplying? But again, not multiplication for the sake of a number, but for the sake of developing leaders, giving opportunity to more people to be connected to the church, so forth. And that's been something that I still somewhat wrestle with. That there are days I wake up and I go, I don't have a clear to-do list today. I have a profound sense of urgency. But I don't there's not this appointment, this meeting, this sales call, this whatever. So that's been an ongoing aspect, and also learning from people who have done it poorly, not at Immanuel, but looking around at people in other ministries who have attached success to the wrong things.
Oh, okay.
So attach success to platform growth, attendance growth, giving growth, baptisms, things that are measurable but not necessarily indicative of the purpose of the church.
Sure, yeah.
And so kind of going, well, how do I avoid that and feed into a culture of real health in Christ?
Yes. Do you think there's a way in a local church setting where you can somehow do both? Or do you think it's best just to stay away from all of the numbers, platform growth, etc., and just focus on the health of the souls and let the Lord, I guess, direct from there? Is it wrong to want to have 40 small groups if we have 30, that type of thing?
I don't think it's wrong. I think it's how much weight you hang on those numbers. So, for example, I think you would be foolish as a church if you were not measuring how much money is being given, how many people are attending, how many groups do we have, and then also tracking where are we in comparison to past years. Because we are an organization, we have to be able to handle our organizational business well. What is our financial state? If our organization is serving a group of people, who are those people? How are we reaching them? Those kinds of things. So numbers matter, but I would say it's akin to if you attach all of your physical health to your body weight, I think you've gotten it a little bit backwards. You know,
Yeah.
so if you're grossly overweight and unhealthy, that number really matters.
Yep.
But once you're kind of moderately healthy, there are other things you need to pay attention to. You know, what is you need to just general healthy things in terms of how are you taking care of your heart, how are you taking, so blood pressure, those kinds of things, diet, sleep, those kinds of things. So it's for like sustainable health.
Yeah.
Church is fairly similar to that.
Yeah,
I think
that's a good way to look at it. I've never thought about it in those terms. So, but I've heard that numerous times from people that have worked at a local church. It's just this idea of, maybe I was in the business world before, and we had metrics and strategies and quarterly things and monthly and weekly and so forth. And then you come into church and you're not exactly sure how to measure success. But now, was that, I'm a little bit surprised here that was like an adjustment for you having grown up in church, or was it just because you grew up in church but you didn't work there? And so now this is is this the first time you're working at a local church?
In a long time. I did right out of college. So I did youth ministry right out of college. And youth ministry counts as working at a local church, but it's also kind of doesn't.
Sure.
At least the way that at that age and maturity level where I was. That's not to insult youth leaders as a whole. But for me, it was a lot more kind of older brother-y, not real leadership oriented. So I think it mostly just had to do with learning a pattern of behavior, pattern of mindset, pattern of behavior. So spending 14-ish years in the business world, and I was in Christian publishing, so it was a ministry-oriented thing, but you go out of business if you don't make a profit. So there's still that business mindset. That still was the shaping factor of success. And in that world, it's very, there's a tension there. Because, so for a while I worked in acquisitions, so that's bringing in new books, new authors, and there's a tension there because there are books that I thought, this is wonderful. We can't sell it. This is a book that's absolutely worth reading and it won't sell.
And you knew this you before you even tried to sell it. You just knew this is a great book and it's not going to sell.
Yeah, the market won't bear this book, kind of thing. It doesn't have a place, and then the worst aspect, the author just isn't well known enough.
Okay.
So now we're getting into that platform,
Sure.
kind of the nastiness of that whole thing, and part of the reason why a lot of church leaders can be addicted to that. So there's a tension there because you have to publish the books that will sell, and you decline some of the books that are worth reading. But as a Christian publisher with convictions, you also want to publish the books that are worth reading. So when you find those ones that converge just right, and it's, you find the Tim Kellers of the world.
Yep.
And you go, this is amazing. We just found a book that's going to sell really well, and I think everybody should read this.
Yes.
And that feels like that's the win of all wins in that world.
Yep, for sure. I'm on the board of an organization called Choice Books. Have you seen them in airports?
Yeah.
Have you seen them, Andrew?
The little spinner racks.
Oh, yeah, have you? Yeah, the little spinner racks. They're in like CVS's and Walmarts.
I used to sell the Choice Books.
Oh, yeah? Yeah, fascinating. Airports and just places like that. And we have the same tension there because you want to have certain things on that bookshelf, and then you also have things that just sell. And it's not a great term, but there's some stuff that was like, could be viewed as like Jesus junk. Like it's like some sayings and stuff, just some things that sell, and it's not
inspirational kind of stuff.
Inspirational stuff. And we'd much rather have, something more profound, something more helpful, and even types of books. But they don't always sell. So you have to like make those choices. And that is a tough thing to be in Christian publishing for sure.
Yeah. And the question that I always had in my mind was how much, this is a bit of a chicken or the egg thing. If a publisher dedicated themselves to publishing only books they thought worth publishing, could they push them into selling? I don't think they could. I think that might have been true 20 years ago, but publishers don't really drive sales anymore. They can influence it, but it's authors drive sales at this point.
Really?
For the most part, yeah. Which is why I was just having this conversation with the two guys I co-host a podcast with who are both authors, and we were talking about why is it that the authors who don't need marketing dollars get all the marketing dollars from publishers? Because So my guess, I don't know who publishes, say, John Grisham's books. I don't know, it's Penguin Random House or something. He probably gets a 6-figure marketing budget attached to his new books. He does not need it.
Right.
His books will sell by existing because Grisham is a marketing term. I would love to have a 6-figure marketing budget for my books. I don't know that it would return on the investment, but I would love to have it.
Sure,
I could
of course.
use it.
Yeah. So if publishers don't push sales now, who does? I mean, you have 4 books here, which we're going to get to, certainly your newest one. So you know a little bit about this. What does sell books then?
Authors develop followings. And that's really what publishers look for as much as anything now. Most publishers are not first and foremost making decisions based on the quality of the writing. And if you read a lot of Christian books, you'll probably nod your head and say, yes, that is sadly true. Most publishers make decisions based on the following that the author brings to the table. And then what the publisher does is try to take that. So if you look at that as a circle, they try to find like that next concentric circle out. So who are the people who should be in that crowd but are not yet? Mm-hmm. So they're going to try to market a little bit more widely. So somebody like me, I bring a limited audience as compared to like my dad. My dad is John Piper, and he's another one who kind of doesn't need the marketing dollars, comparatively speaking. And so he just brings a following with him, and then Crossway or whoever's publishing his books they're trying to push it out there to those who might not be in that middle circle.
Sure.
But the author drives it. So much of the marketing strategy rests on an author's willingness to do stuff like this.
Okay.
Are you willing to have all the conversations on all the podcasts? Are you willing to tweet, Instagram, whatever?
Yep.
And some authors are super willing. Some are steadfastly a heart, like I just won't.
Yep.
And then there's the middle ground where you go, I want to, but I also don't want to, go to the point where I feel like I need to go take a shower at the end of every day because I just sort of sold my soul to the marketing devil. Right.
Yes. I can imagine that's a tension. But now, so there's got to be different categories here, right? So like if your dad, which by the way, I'm sure he's still writing books.
He is.
Okay. So if he writes a book, he's got name recognition, and that's just like he's kind of broken through at a certain level, and he just has a certain amount of name recognition. He might not have 100,000 Instagram followers, and he might not even have much social media, but he's got name recognition. But then, like, let's take you, for example. You also have a certain amount of name recognition. Is that what they're after, or is it more, but yes, you also have an email list, and you also have, X amount of social media followers. Mm-hmm. Like, is there different kind of categories here that they would look for?
Yeah, I think my dad could probably take one of his books to just about any publisher, and unless they just didn't like him, they're sort of anti-gospel or whatever, they would say yes based solely on the numbers that it can deliver. They would say, yes, we'll take on your book. That's not true for me.
Yep.
Because I have to find the right combination. If it's a book that they're still measuring, is the book worth publishing? I don't think anybody asked that about my dad's books. Mm-hmm. I think he writes stuff worth reading, just to clarify. But I think that the question is, it's in the past because he's written 40 reliable books or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have to go in, and if it's a new publisher, they ask, how many Twitter followers, how many Instagram followers, what's your Facebook reach, do you have an email, who are people you can reach out to who will endorse this? And it really feels like a self-sales pitch.
Sure.
And it's kind of gross. I don't like it.
Yeah, where you have to sell yourself to the publisher, you mean?
Right.
That feels sort of gross. Yeah,
Yes.
I could imagine that for sure. I mean, but isn't it, you hear of like these stories where like someone has a great book, but they're trying to get it published and they won't because they don't have a platform, but they don't have a platform because they haven't published their book. And it's just like, you're just kind of stuck there, right?
Yeah, it's like being not hired because you don't have experience. And you go, how do I get experience if I can't get hired?
Sure.
It's a circular, like snake eating its tail kind of thing.
Yep.
And then there's the stories of somebody who didn't have any following, total no name. They publish a novel, and then all of a sudden it's New York Times bestseller.
Exactly.
And those are the ones. It's here in Nashville, it's the songwriter who's nobody who then gets a cut from, I don't know, Keith Urban or somebody.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden they're a name, and that's what keeps everybody going.
Yes.
They're like, I don't have a name, but I could be the person who wrote, was it Catherine Stockett, who wrote The Help?
Yep.
Or something. And she wasn't anybody. I think she was like a creative, it was like a project for her MFA or something like that.
Dang, that's so cool. It's always fun when that happens, but you can't like, that can't be your strategy for success, right? Because that's not a reliable strategy.
It's like buying lottery tickets instead of getting a job.
Right. Yes. So is writing in your family's blood?
In the sense that we all, I mean, not everybody in the family, but I'd say, so I have 3 older brothers. 2 of them are both gifted writers. The third just doesn't care.
Okay.
He's a really gifted speaker, but my parents are both writers. My dad's dad was a traveling evangelist. So think like 1950s tent meetings. You know, he would show up and it was like, you know, Dr. Bill Piper and we'll be here for the revival.
Cool.
And he wrote, but he was a really eloquent speaker. So I think his writing channeled a lot more into sermon manuscripts, things like that.
I see.
And he was a great storyteller, great joke teller, just really good communicator. So yeah, there is an element of it's in the blood, but then it's also in the environment. You know, I grew up in a house where there's just books on every wall, and we didn't have a TV not because my parents were morally opposed, but they just said, well, if we have a TV, we'll watch it.
Right.
And if we don't watch it, we can use our time for other things.
Yeah.
And so I read a ton of books.
Okay.
And the more you read, the easier writing comes. Like the more natural it is, because you're just kind of stocked up on language. Mm-hmm. And it's it becomes a more natural way to communicate, because that's what's communicated to you, so that's what you can kind of return.
Yes.
And yeah, so we just sort of swam in those waters. Huh. And I didn't realize it wasn't totally normal until probably college, when other people would just find writing, you know, a 3 or 4 page essay brutally difficult. And I would wait until like an hour before class and write it because I could.
Yeah.
And it never crossed my mind until then that this might be abnormal, to kind of find writing a thing that's enjoyable and natural.
Yes. So how much reading did you guys do? I'm sure it varied per kid, obviously. And by the way, do you have any sisters?
I have a younger sister.
Okay.
So she was adopted when I was 12.
Oh, okay.
So her upbringing was very different, because the boys are all about 3 years apart, so 3 years between each of us, and then a 12-year gap, and then she joined the family. And so both being the only girl and being separated by that amount of age, she had almost an only child experience.
Yeah.
Whereas I had the like doormat of the family experience.
Gotcha. So 5 kids.
Yep.
So is this like you guys were bookworms, or it's like instead of watching TV, you know, for an hour a day or 30 minutes, you would read a little bit, or like how extreme was this reading?
It was never, I don't remember being assigned. It was just sort of like, if we ever said we were bored, my mom was basically like, draw a picture, read a book, go outside.
Yeah, nice.
And it was just kind of like, those you have options, go do them.
Yep.
And so, you know, and then like if we were sick and stayed home from school, we didn't get babied. My mom was like, sick is not a thing to enjoy. Sick is a thing to get over.
Yep.
So you're going to lie in your bed and you can have a book. And like, so it was just sort of like the thing that filled up the gaps of life. But I enjoyed it. So we enjoyed it to varying degrees. My oldest brother, he teaches literature now. So he clearly, like, books, words, language are his. He loves it. My second brother hated books. Just not his thing. And then the third was kind of somewhere in the middle, read, but wasn't crazy about it. And I'm the type, like, every week we'd go to the library and I'd like max out whatever limit my mom gave me. So return the ones that I had read and get the new ones.
Okay.
I just loved reading.
Yeah.
But loved sports, loved being outside. And so those were, it was like I said, draw a picture, read a book, go outside.
Yeah, I'm gonna definitely steal that and use that with our kids, because there's just a guy on here yesterday, Tom Woodard, who kind of made the point that boredom essentially breeds creativity. Mm-hmm. And he's so right. Like right now with kids, with between iPad, TV, Xbox, YouTube, everything going on, I mean, if you don't let them get bored, they're not going to be bored. So you have to like set some boundaries around that stuff and give them some space to get bored, so they want to go out and play a little or something.
Yeah, boredom is really just indecisiveness. Mm-hmm. It's like blank space during which you're indecisive. The moment you make a decision, you stop being bored. I was bored now I'm going to ride my bike. I was bored.
exactly.
Now I'm going to climb a tree. Well, now you're not bored anymore. You're doing something fun.
Yep.
And so it's just, it's kind of helping them figure out how to make a decision to use their time. And you take away the default options.
Yes. So would you consider your dad a better speaker or writer? And what's his preference?
What's funny, I think his preference growing up would have been right. He was terrified of public speaking until late in college, like the kind of terrified that was like would cause physical illness, borderline like vocal paralysis.
No way.
Yeah, he's written and shared about it. I mean, it was really a like a hand of the Lord on his life.
Wow.
Maybe it was before his junior or senior year in college. He got asked. The chaplain just stopped him. He went to Wheaton College, so Christian college. The chaplain asked him one day, just walking across campus, "Hey, John, would you pray in chapel?" And he said yes before he could think about it, and then was just agonized over it for the days leading up to it. And I think he just sort of made a deal with God. I'm trying to remember exactly. I think he said, "God, if you help me do this, I will never turn down another opportunity out of fear again, another speaking opportunity." And I believe to this day he's done that. He's like, I've turned things down, but never because I'm afraid.
Sure.
Doesn't fit my schedule, that's not a group that I can devote time to, whatever, but not out of fear. So yeah, he was definitely more of a writer at that point. And he speaks like a writer too. Like he's a fiery speaker, but everything is so crafted.
Yes.
So articulate. He doesn't off the cuff much. He doesn't like doing off the cuff.
Okay.
Because two reasons. One, because he really likes to prepare and think about things in advance. And two, he says, I don't know what I'm going to say if I don't have it written down. And that's when I get myself in trouble. So,
yeah, interesting. So very similar to Ray in that regard. Yeah. Ray is the most scripted speaker I think I've personally encountered. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting about it is he is super experienced. I mean, he's 70, 71 years old. Mm-hmm. And you take a family gathering, for example, if anyone could just jot down a couple of bullet points and just go for it on the spot, it'd be Ray.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've seen him script stuff for family gatherings. I mean, and that's been instructive to me, because to me, what I get from that is I get a sense of high regard for people's time. Yeah. And if we're going to get people together and ask them for their time, then we're going to make good use of it, and we're not going to waste a minute of it. Yeah, and that comes through. That's the same lesson I picked up more from Ray than from my dad, mainly because people ignore their parents. I probably should have learned it from my dad. But yeah, the idea that it's so, I've been asked to pray in service before, and my inclination would be to walk up there and pray. But it's absolutely worth every minute of the time spent sitting down and thinking about a passage of scripture and I don't need to script the prayer necessarily, but like, what are the things that I want to make sure I pray through? Yes. And it's cohesive. It's not rambling. You don't repeat yourself. You honor people's time. And I think especially in a corporate worship setting, that's honoring to the Lord too, because it adds an element of cohesion. Yes. You're not sort of a stumbling block or stumbling over your words in the middle of a service. Yes. Well, what are your thoughts on that? Because my background could potentially be a little bit more similar in it was a Baptist church you came from. Is that correct? And this may not, I'm sure there's differences among all of the different, types of Baptists to begin with and so forth. But I feel like the scripted or liturgy, that type of thing, that would be a little bit more high church, Anglican and Presbyterian, that type of thing. And then maybe less common in some of the Baptist circles, and certainly less common with my circle, which was like Anabaptist, like Mennonite, so which is a part of the Anabaptist. And I feel like where kind of my angle would have been a little bit more is maybe a little bit more emphasis on like the Spirit and in the moment and being led in the moment and those types of things. And like reading a prayer, would be totally fine, by the way. Like at the church I grew up with, if someone read a prayer, that would be fine. It's just, it doesn't happen all that much because I feel like it's a little bit more about the spontaneity and so forth. So is that how your upbringing would have been as well? And what are your thoughts on adjusting to a little bit more of of a pre-thought, what some would say less in the moment. And I hate to use the term less spirit-led because the Spirit can lead you when you're thinking it through the day before, just like He can lead you in the moment. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, so the church I grew up in was Baptist, but it wasn't, don't think like, white wooden country Baptist church. It was, we were Reformed theologically, and that informs a lot because the Reformed theological tradition is going to be a little bit more tied to that, kind of lean a little bit more high church, or at least a little bit more structured and formal, because of the kind of the gravitas and seriousness that they give to elements of the church service. So we had a little bit more of that feel. There was the occasional sort of call and response kind of thing. So, leader reads a portion of a psalm, congregation reads something in return. The pastoral prayer was, I don't know how scripted they always were, but it was, it was more of a formal thing. The pastor is praying, kind of leading people into the presence of God. But it certainly wasn't, kind of liturgical in full. Mm-hmm. And so, unlike a lot of, your kind of middle of the road Southern Baptist churches, for example, there wasn't a lot of casual anything in our church. Also, my dad's just not a casual person, and he has a, I don't know if abhorrence is too strong of a word, but it's pretty close for trite things in worship. And so like every moment matters. And he treated it as such. And so, and asked the rest of the musical worship leaders, the people praying, et cetera, to do the same. And so there was a formality to it that kind of belied the Baptistness. Yes.
Did he structure his, I've seen service orders for Immanuel, and it's down to the second. It's like, this song is 3 minutes and 26 seconds or whatever. And then it's like, it's real structured. And of course, and forgive the garbage truck in the background, by the way. There's a lot going on.
Is that a metaphor for this podcast?
Yeah, there's definitely a garbage truck right now. And Andrew, I don't know what we're going to run into because I think the building next door got sold a couple of months ago. So it's possible at some point we're going to be dealing with construction here.
Demolition.
Maybe demolition, pulling down the building.
Being back at Belmont all over again.
Right. What was a lot of construction going on?
Well, yeah, we had, when I was at Belmont, the president is Bob Fisher, and when I was a student there from 2010 to 2014, he was affectionately known as Bob the Builder because he kept knocking down student dormitories and building 8 or 9 story student halls in those places, and a lot of those buildings required dynamite in the ground, and a lot of students would be woken up, me included, by that dynamite going off at 8 a.m. in the morning every weekday.
That'll do it.
I used to live next to a rock quarry. It's a bit disorienting until you figure out what this earthquake is twice a day or something. Yeah.
But anyhow, the Immanuel service is very structured. And if something were to happen that's clearly Holy Spirit led, TJ's not going to just be like, no, it's time to move on to this. There's room for that, but there's a lot of thought that goes in. Is that a little bit more how your church would have been?
Especially once technology advanced to the point of any sort of streaming. When I was in high school and college, we went to multi-site, and so there was video recording. And for a while, they did a live satellite stream of the sermon into the other one. So it had to be to the second. Everybody hated it because there wasn't the space for let's go through the song one more time because the Spirit's working on people. So you couldn't linger at all. But yeah, it was more like structured elements with some breathing room in there.
I see.
And then of course, my dad is not known for brevity in his preaching. So he, especially in whatever the last service of the day is, he might feel the Spirit leading to go, 12 minutes longer than just.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. The occasional 47-minute sermon was not uncommon. 50 minutes.
Okay.
Growing up, I think he got tighter as time went on,
but not like an hour and a quarter very often. Or
he might have cleared an hour here and there. It was pretty rare.
Okay.
Yeah. We're not. He did recognize the law of diminishing returns on this thing.
Okay.
And he told a story one time where there was a dear old lady in our church who was just a faithful member, had been since before he got there, and he was preaching. He was going on like, minute 48. She just stands up and taps her watch.
No.
Yeah. I mean, just the kind of thing that you can do when you're 80. Like, what are you going to say to me?
Yeah.
And, and he was younger as a preacher then, so she was twice his age.
Sure.
And she just stood up, tapped her watch, and was like, wrap this thing up.
That's funny.
Pot roast is cooking.
Oh man, that would be hard as a speaker. Hopefully he was like secure enough to like just push on or do what needed to be done, It'd be hard just not to be like, we're done here. Y'all can finish this service yourself. I'm out.
Yeah, we read the text. You're good.
Yeah, exactly. So the church you grew up in was Bethlehem Baptist, and I don't know actually a lot about it. Single location, multiple locations. You mentioned streaming out to other satellite locations.
Yeah. So my dad took over as the pastor there in 1980, I was born in 83. So he'd been the pastor there for 3 years before I was born. And at that point it had just a single downtown Minneapolis location. Its former name was First Swedish Baptist Church, very Minnesotan.
Where's the Swedes come from? Is there a lot of Swedes up there?
Yeah, Swedes and Norwegians, huge percentage of the population in Minnesota, big Scandinavian population.
Minneapolis in particular, or Minnesota?
Minnesota, yeah. I mean, it makes sense. They found the coldest, iciest place they could. They're like, oh, it feels like Norway.
Yeah.
And so like they were still doing Swedish language services into the 60s and 70s. So not too long before my dad got there. So he took over, and it was a church of 300 or 400 people and very old. Like the congregation trended very old. I think my dad said he averaged a funeral a week for his first year and a half.
Wow.
Which he said was miserable and difficult and like the best pastoral school, just in terms of caring for people, walking through things, learning how to preach the gospel in a difficult context and so forth. And then just faithfully led the church. And so over time, brought on some other staff who were a little bit younger. Family started to come. And so the church just very steadily grew. It never had like a peak year where it just doubled or tripled in size. It just kind of percentage by percentage grew. So that when I was in high school, late 90s, early 2000s, it was probably 2,000 people.
Okay.
1,800, 2,000 people, something like that. And that's when they started a second campus. So single church, second campus in the north suburbs. And it took them a while to figure out the best way to do video-based preaching. So they tried the satellite thing for a while, didn't like the restrictiveness or the unpredictability. It could cut out in the middle, and then like who's playing backup. So then they went to they did a Saturday night service, recorded the sermon, played that at the second location, and he would rotate between them. So he was live at one location every other Sunday.
I see.
And then after a few years, they started a third location in the south suburbs, and similar thing, rotating through. And actually, I think they're in the process of doing the same thing that the Village Church did in Texas, so Matt Chandler's church, where the locations are now being spun off as independent churches.
Yes.
And not like a church split, but just it's healthier contextually. There's some very distinct differences in the demographics and whatever between campuses. So the north campus will be an independent church. The downtown one will be an independent church, and I think the south one will as well. I don't think they're staying attached. And I don't know what the time frame on that is, but so it's been an interesting arc from a church where there's a bunch of little old ladies and we knew everybody to 3 campuses to now a little bit more concise.
Yes.
And my dad retired from the pastorate in 2013, but is still a member there, and he similar to what Ray is like at Immanuel. He keeps his distance from the decision making, both formally and informally. Like there's an agreement that he's not going to go, try to cast a long shadow.
Sure.
But yeah, still an invested church member, still attends, and is still connected with the college that they started and the seminary, and
I see.
So does some teaching there, and
yeah. 2013. I didn't know it was that long ago. Speaking of preference for speaking or writing, my understanding is that your preference is writing, but you're also a very good speaker. Where do you think your sweet spot is there? What's your personal preference?
I think it depends on format. So I really enjoy speaking, but that feels more concise to me. It's 30 minutes here, 40 minutes there, 20 minutes here. It's sort of you have to be, earlier we were talking about scripting things for using time well. Whereas writing, you write 160 pages to take a single idea and flesh it out. So they feel like very different things to me. And I just think there's probably kinds of speaking I'm not as good at. Like I don't have as much experience formally preaching, walking through a book of the Bible to preach through. And I think preaching is not just walking through a book of the Bible, but preaching is a different mode of verbal communication than teaching is.
Absolutely.
Teaching is helping people understand. Preaching, there's a declarative, prophetic, authoritative voice to it, which is different. And I don't think everybody's called to it either. Everybody who can speak is not called to it.
Right.
So, yeah, I'd say speaking is something that I really enjoy and probably am still figuring out what would my sweet spot be for that.
I see. Yeah.
Writing is something that I feel like I've found a little bit more clarity on. This is a kind of thing that I can do well. I mean, I can branch out, but I have more confidence that if you said write on this, I could say okay. If you said speak on this, I'd need to work harder at it.
That's interesting because if you could write on it, in theory, you could then speak on it, right? I mean, if you're going to do you write out, your talks, if you're going to talk somewhere, do you write it out pretty word for word?
No, and I think that's why I would need to work harder. I like outlines, which means I have to know the stuff.
Sure.
So outlines, and I, fairly built out ones, but also just there's some gaps in there that I need to fill in with whatever it is that I know.
Yeah.
Whereas in writing, you fill in all the gaps.
Yeah. Yep.
And you edit it tightly, and that's a different thing. And so I think you have to know the same amount either way, but you also get trial and error when you're writing. You don't when you're speaking.
Right.
If you have error, it just didn't go well.
Yes. Yeah.
If you have error in writing, you just hit backspace a few times and it never happened.
Yep. You're totally right about that. I was curious with your role a year and a month as director for community at Immanuel. I mean, communication in general, which is kind of what we're talking about here. I mean, that's important if you're going to be a director for community, obviously. Have you noticed some things that don't work so good or that do work that you've noticed, or have you learned things about the human nature since you're in that role at Immanuel?
It's an interesting thing because church is very optional. So communication from a church, it feels like a perpetual challenge because people don't have to read it. They don't have to care. They don't have to pay attention. And you don't want to flip the other way where you're kind of gimmicky and trying to get people's attention, kind of overselling or over anything. So trying to create a context where people think your communication is worthy of their attention is hard. So COVID exacerbated that because we didn't have certain options for communication. Everything boiled down to the digital.
Right.
So, I mean, you can phone call, but if you're trying to, connect with 100 people, a phone call is not very efficient. And so it's emails, it's text messages, it's videos that you're then trying to communicate to people through social media or through an email. And you just end up in this little digital circle. And but if somebody doesn't want to open it, they never know what's going on. Mm-hmm. And so that has been a challenge, just in terms of people's psyche. And COVID has also made people, I think, real tired of all digital communication. Mm-hmm. We're addicted to our phones, but we're also real sick of them.
Yeah, it's true.
And so, responses to emails are worse. Open rates on things haven't gotten any better. Or there's just a fatigue of that kind of communication. So then you end up in the place where you're like, well, let's try to figure out how to communicate with them in person. It might not be safe to gather them in person. If we do, how do we get them there without communicating digitally?
Sure. Yeah.
How do you invite somebody if you can't get a hold of them?
Yep.
So those kinds of things have created a cycle of occasional communication frustrations. And then I think figuring out how people respond to different things. I prefer very succinct communications.
Yeah,
I
same.
want bullet points.
Yeah, me too. Life should just be bullet points, honestly.
Yeah, just especially if it's about details on something.
Yeah.
Just be like, here are the details on this event, and then just bullet points. And then if you want to write like a lengthy thing at the bottom, that's
after
like, here's
the
how we
bullet
feel.
points,
sure. Just and I feel like a lot of communication is a little bit like going to like a food blog. Like, I just want the recipe for the red beans and rice, but I have to read through the person's life story and how it connects to their Enneagram number and why their children love this and how they tried it 4 times and it failed. I don't care about any of that.
Yeah.
I just want the recipe. So my inclination is just the recipe.
Yep.
But a lot of people really like the stuff.
It's true.
They like the story. They like the kind of written in, whether it's encouragement or what feels a little bit like puff piece to me is not puff piece to a lot of people. It's meaningful.
Yep.
So I need to figure out how to communicate in a way that's meaningful to others.
Right.
Not just what I would prefer.
Yeah.
And that can be a challenge.
And that's the trick when it's something like church too, because you got to figure out how to best communicate to the mass, because you're not going to write an email for every single person. Yeah. So knowing this email is going to go out to some people who prefer bullet points. Some people are going to prefer much more information. You got to figure out the most effective way to craft one email or one message for everyone, and kind of figure out the most effective way. It's going to be less than ideal for some, and less than ideal for others. It's just the way it's going to, and then others is going to be like right on. But that's just the way communication works. But yeah, I'm just communication in a church setting seems hard, because then you also don't want to, even if you're meeting in person, I know Ray and TJ are very careful about this. They don't want all the announcements across the pulpit, and I think that's very, very wise. So you still got to figure out, even if you're meeting in person, how you're going to communicate some things. Yeah. I'm curious, though, with when you look at the state of the church, which is a very broad thing, I guess, because it's like, well, what church are we talking about? But the state of church in America today. Yeah. What are you seeing? Like, are you seeing certain trends? Are you seeing certain things that are good, bad? I'm just kind of curious. You grew up in church, and were a pastor's kid, and your grandfather was an evangelist, which I didn't know. And then you were at Lifeway, which is Christian publishing, and now you're at Immanuel. I mean, this is definitely a space that you're in. I'm just kind of curious what you're seeing.
That's a big question. It's easy to go to the discouraging right now, because there's a lot of overt ugliness. I think the polarization that surrounds church right now, and when I say polarization, I mean debate over masks. Thinking specifically of, for example, the way that it's been handled by John MacArthur's church in California. And I don't throw him out there to throw stones, but just as an example of one polarized extreme. And then there are other churches that are still not gathering in person. So you have these extremes, and that's just a statement that those extremes exist. But the animosity of one extreme to the other, or the judgment. You're not meeting because you are in fear. You are meeting because you're careless and don't care about people, both of which are probably false characterizations, or maybe there's a hint of truth there. I don't really know. I don't want to be the one to make that judgment call. I think that's discouraging. But a lot of that comes from within the church. The way people bring a polarized, antagonistic mindset to church, because that is the environment in which we live politically, social media, everything falls along a right or wrong line. There's very little room for nuance in people's minds, very little room for holding things open-handedly. The idea that I believe this, you believe that, yet we are still brother and or sister in Christ. Like we're only good at, I hold this to be my conviction, so you should too. Right. Or you're wrong, or you're a coward, or whatever. And I think that mentality, I read an article, or part of an article the other day, that was talking about how it just looked numerically and said the average American watches something like 4 to 7 hours of news a week. Something like that.
But it's way more than that.
Well, that probably also includes people like me who never watch the news,
Sure.
but we're on social media and we get all of our news that way.
Yeah.
But how many Americans spend half that amount of time doing anything with their church? Mm-hmm. Now, and if you just go to television, it's way more than 4 to 7 hours. I think that was just news.
Yeah, true.
And
true.
so basically the statement was, whether or not you want to believe this, people are being discipled by media sources. Mm-hmm. And I don't personally look at media and say, fake news, they are the enemy, but they're not Christian. They're not discipling people in a meaningful spiritual way. So there is a problem there. And so that's what the church is up against. People who are bringing in the discipleship of MSNBC, Fox News, Drudge Report, pick your favorite news source, and the methodology of the talking heads.
Yes.
And that's how we now view church, the church body, controversies in the church, things we don't like in the church. And it's contentious.
Yes.
So that's the negative. I see that just tendency kind of across the board that's people's more and more their default. The positives, though, are there are just so many churches and church movements that are dead set on declaring the gospel. And they're just trying to figure out how to do it well. And different contexts, different size churches, different demographics. But the Bible believing church is not dying.
Right.
When you hear about declines in churches, if you look at that closely, it's almost always mainline denominations where the Bible has taken a back seat. Mm-hmm. When you hear about young people walking away from the church, it's usually disconnection to Scripture in their church and in their family life that leads to that. Statistically speaking, there are a lot, that's not to put, I'm not trying to guilt parents there.
Yeah.
When the Bible takes center stage, the church does pretty well, despite all of our disparities and dissension and failures and so forth.
Yep.
I have the gut reaction when I hear about prominent evangelical leaders falling into sin, sexual sin, financial sin, being a bully sin, whatever, to think kind of doom and gloom thoughts. Jesus has been dealing with this for 2,000 years,
Yes.
You read the Old Testament, like he picked his people and then he put kings in place and they were by and large just utter failures.
Yeah, it's true.
And he remained faithful to them, and then he sent his Savior to the same people. And so I feel like there's a lot of reasons for hope there. But yeah, just the church that remains faithful is doing just fine. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a thing that I have to come back to regularly when I start to get kind of angry, angsty, stressed, panicky, or, we get a handful of angry emails.
Yes.
Now, Immanuel has it remarkably well in terms of the graciousness of the people who are part of our church. Like our leaders are really well encouraged for the most part. But they, still get some criticism here and there. And those can be really discouraging things. And then I go, but if we stay faithful, Jesus has proven himself to carry his people through.
Yes.
And I don't think he's going to stop now.
Yeah, that's a good word. And I do sometimes have negative thoughts too about how polarized things are, and with the digital age and social media and where things are politically and how things are racially charged and everything kind of coming together, and thinking, boy, this is this is unprecedented time, and how's this going to pan out? Well, I mean, it's like Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun. I mean, it's not like there's anything going on right now that like the Lord can't handle or that hasn't played out in the past. I mean, when you look at history, I mean, what was it, 50 plus 20? I mean, 70, 75 years ago, we were battling Nazi Germany? Yeah. I mean, that's not that long ago. That is not that long ago. Yeah. And Jesus walked this earth, about 2,000 years ago. Yeah. So, and that was 75 years ago. It's not like it's not like anything that's happening right now is particularly. I mean, when you look at the course of history, it's not like anything that's happening right now is particularly dangerous. Although it's still very unique to our time, and there are very real, unique challenges. And thank God, Jesus Christ is still king.
Yes.
So that is,
Yeah, I think one of our biggest, the biggest change that we have faced from those past years. So like you said, 75, 80 years ago, World War II, 50, 55 years ago, civil rights movement.
right.
That we know lots of people who are a lot older than that. Like they lived through it.
Yeah.
They remember it. And what we face today is an extension of that in terms of the racial divisions and the push for justice there. What I think is so different for us today is awareness. In my pocket, I have a device that makes me aware of every single terrible thing that's happening around the world. And that's unprecedented.
Yes.
Negativity, fallenness, contention, lawlessness, terrible leaders, wars, none of it's unprecedented.
Yep.
The ability to know about all of it in the space of 5 minutes is, and we're not designed for that.
Yes.
We are not designed to process the terror that the world holds across the globe. We're when the Bible says bear one another's burdens, it's in the context of a local church. It's in the context of you're aware of each other's burdens, each other's pain. So when we're supposed to weep with those who weep, there's a context for that. And I don't think we're designed to try to broadcast our grief across the world or bear the burdens of the world. That's God's job.
Yeah, for sure.
Which sounds callous to say, because well, not my job. No, we have a job.
Yep.
But it's real defined.
Yep. It's a local job.
Yeah.
The two people have mentioned just in the last week, there's a documentary on Netflix called The Social Dilemma.
I've heard about this. I haven't seen it yet.
I keep hearing about it. Still haven't seen it. I'm going to watch it. I just checked, actually, Andrew, today, and because I had watched one documentary within the last 6-8 months that had to do with social media, and it definitely wasn't this one. So I have not seen The Social Dilemma yet, but I'm interested to check it out. Apparently, it's people that have been involved with creating social media. Some of these leaders are now questioning whether this is a good thing or not.
Yeah, I think it was workers at Facebook and maybe Twitter and Google.
Okay.
And yeah, just the way that those companies intentionally kind of hook people and control them.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. What do you have here, Andrew?
This was a book that a few people at Immanuel had told me about. It's kind of related to Barnabas's comment about we have this device in our pockets. It's a book called 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You. I haven't actually read it yet, but I mean, the premise is in the title. It talks about how the phone and the smartphone, the modern smartphone, has become part of us in such a way that it's fully integrated into the daily patterns of our lives, never offline, always within reach. Basically, it's now a tool that almost makes us like God in a way.
Yeah.
And over time, it's now we're starting to slowly see how we can't be God. And that's obviously that's the long, sad story of the human race is we try to be God. What was the first line in the garden? You will be like God if you eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And the smartphone is just another manifestation of that.
Yeah.
And I've heard it's a great book. It's by Tony Rinke.
I've heard of this book.
Yeah. I know Tony. He works for Desiring God, which is my dad's ministry. And
really?
Tony's a great guy. And he is he's an incredibly careful thinker. And when he decides to write on a topic, he didn't come up with these 12 ways like in a blog post. This is a researched, thoughtful thing that's going to look at kind of the soul of the issue. So he's I've been afraid to read this because I don't want to be convicted.
Right.
I'm 100% sure it would make me change some things about my life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But I share your I've heard of this book. I also haven't read it. So we're all kind of sharing misery here. But or maybe sharing some conviction. But this guy lives in Minneapolis.
I think he lives in Arizona now. He got sick of the Minnesota winters and moved his family south.
Smart man.
Yeah.
Well, if you ever know that he's going to be through Nashville, we need to get him on the podcast because that would be a fascinating discussion for sure. And phones have it now where it's almost like we're scared of AI You know, have you seen any of like what Elon Musk is into with Neuralink and stuff? Is like you cut a hole in the skull and put something in there, and then someone who had some brain damages, now they can move their arm because this Neuralink thing is firing your brain in a way that hadn't been before. And it's like, and at some point maybe we get to communicate with each other without actually saying words, because like my Neuralink can communicate with your Neuralink, and like we just have this sort of understanding without having to talk to each other, which a lot of that stuff sounds kind of crazy. And even when you get into AI, you know, like, well, the robot's going to take over the world and everything. And that's an advanced discussion. But let's just be honest. This phone never leaves rarely leaves my reach. Now at night, I'll put it on the kitchen counter.
Yeah.
But, you know, there again, it's playing music on the Sonos, which I'm listening to, you know, like,
right.
And when it sleeps, it's within arm's reach. And when I'm working throughout the day, I don't like it in my pocket. So I like to keep it, you know, I don't want something happening a couple years where it's like everyone that had their phone in their pocket all the time, all of a sudden has like a cancer spot. So I always have it out if possible.
It's a rise in hip cancer.
But I communicate through it. I receive information through it. Yeah. It affects my thinking. I tell it what to do. It helps me know what to do. I mean, this is AI. Let's be honest. We already have like a computer chip. It's not implanted in our brain, but it's basically found its way into the human experience already.
Yeah, it really has. Yeah, everything that we're talking about reminds me of the line from Jurassic Park. It was Jeff Goldblum's line where he said, "You were so busy thinking about whether you could do it, you never stopped to think whether you should."
Yeah.
About creating dinosaurs. I feel like
Yes.
maybe Elon Musk should listen to that line.
Yeah.
Go watch Jurassic Park, but
yeah. Well, the social media guys should have listened to that.
Yes.
I think social media I guess we'll see what happens with the AI and the Neuralink stuff, but that to me seems a little bit more like the Neuralink thing. It's looking at, here's problems in society. How can we fix this? How can we make people's lives better that have brain dysfunction or Alzheimer's, those types of things? Social media was a little bit more like, oh, wouldn't this be cool? And it just explodes. And next thing you know, it's like Sam Harris said, we're all involved with this psychological experiment that no one gave permission to be a part of, and we don't yet know how it's going to turn out.
Yeah.
That's what's happening right now.
Yeah. There's no controls, no parameters.
Yeah, that's right. Masks. Okay. Help me to understand. Okay. You know, and I'm serious because like I generally have not had this conversation much, but like I am curious just to think objectively looking in on this, if we could just remove ourselves from it, and if we were aliens looking in and there was this pandemic that was happening and it came from this side of the globe and wound up over here because people travel on airplanes and it passes through respiratory. When you talk, you have little spittles that come out, of course. Everyone knows this. No one disagrees with this. This particular type of, disease, virus, whatever, it likes to kind of latch onto these spittles when people talk. And if I breathe what you kind of breathed on me or talk, like I'm going to get the virus if you had it, those types of things. So if you put like this cloth in front of your face or carry around this shield at all times, that's a way that you can protect other people if you happen to have the virus. Like that makes sense. Now, an argument against that could be, yes, but no one really knows the science. And back in February and March, they definitely didn't know the science. There was kind of a he said, she said type of thing going on. And then next thing you know, it got politicized, and now we can't step back from this having a political kind of, because things happen like that. Things get like that. That's just a human nature thing. That's not even a 2020 thing, but like when something gets branded, it's hard to get unbranded.
Yes.
And I feel like the mask sort of got politically branded. Now we can't unbrand it. But can you help me to understand what is the best argument for these folks that would basically be like never maskers? Like what's going on?
Man, I struggle with that. And because I struggle to put myself in their shoes, and I would say I'm a scientific neutral on the masks. I don't have any idea how well they work. Since I don't have any idea, I feel like minorly inconveniencing myself for a potential good is a good idea. Also, for the mental well-being of those around me, especially in gatherings. So when we meet for church or in public places, those kinds of things. That's okay. I don't have a problem with that. I don't have any idea how well it's working. But if somebody else feels like it's working and they have peace of mind because of it, it's still worth it to me. On the flip side of that is, I think there are some people who steadfastly believe that masks don't work because they latched onto it. By and large, though, I think it's very similar to like a gun control debate, where my right to, in this case, not wear a mask, in another case, to bear arms, is inviolable. You have no right to tell me to do this thing. And so the right is the highest good. I have a hard time defending that because I think rights are, a legal right is not the same thing as a moral right. And, or an ethical right or a good decision. And so, yes, I think in most cases, there's a lot of places people have a legal right not to wear masks. I don't think that makes it a moral right or the moral best. And I think that's the thing. I think as Christians, if somebody is not a Christian, having this argument with them is very difficult because the only way that I look at it and I go, this should be the standard to which we hold ourselves is something I think you have to be submitted to Christ to really buy into. And that is, we are willing to lay down our rights and our conveniences for the good of others. And if they were to say, well, we don't know if it's for the good of others, they may be right. The perceived good of others, the peace of mind of others, and the peaceability of the whole. So, whether that's the body of Christ or society, I mean, if there would be significant just peaceableness, to make up a word, if people were willing to say, I'll inconvenience myself slightly by breathing through cloth. But the right, personal right, independent right, don't tell me what to do right, don't tread on me right, is the highest good in their mind, I think. And I was just having this conversation with somebody else today who's closely related to somebody who's a steadfast, no-mask person. And he made the observation, the guy I was talking to, the accusation of many of the people on the no-mask side is that we're living in fear if we wear masks, especially within the Christian community. Like, have faith, don't live in fear.
That's the thing? You can hear that?
That's the thing. We shouldn't be living in fear to self-isolate, to social distance, to wear masks are marks of fear. There's probably an element of truth in that. As a virus that has killed 200,000 Americans causes a lot of fear. But what he observed, though, was that their refusal to wear a mask is also a sign of fear because they're fearing state control of something. They're fearing being told what to do. They're fearing, if they can mandate this, what will they mandate next? And so there's sort of a fear of giving over control. So this little action is trying to kind of maintain a control as a precedent, I think, although I'm sure they wouldn't articulate it just that way. Because they would say, we're not afraid, see? So that's the best I can do at sorting this out. The more I think about it, though, the more I think this is not an argument anybody will win unless we agree to a greater good. So, at Immanuel, we ask people to wear masks, and we're not shy about it, not because we want to argue about the science of masks, but because we look around and we say, this is a way to be unified, to care for others. If somebody is in fear, not wearing a mask is not going to change their mind. Wearing a mask could give them peace of mind.
Sure.
That's serving somebody.
Yep.
So would you serve in this way? Would you care for somebody in this way?
Yep.
Because there's a good that's greater than our rights.
Yep.
And I think we have to come back to that, or we don't have a compelling argument.
Yeah, I just think it's sort of a fascinating discussion because I do think it's unfortunate because at this place, what happens is if you wear a mask all the time, you're going to be viewed as kind of pro-left. And if you're like, I never wear a mask and I'm never going to wear a mask, you're associated with kind of the right, which is sort of weird that a health issue has become a political issue. Let's just be honest. This is very, very weird.
It's real weird.
And it's unfortunate. both people, my understanding is both kind of parties, the Republicans and Democrats, certainly have some responsibility here. I think it's safe to say, Trump has to accept his share of responsibility for masks becoming as politicized as it has.
Yeah.
And so I think most people would just, like, if you're looking at the facts, would mostly agree with that. The gun thing, though, let's talk about that for a second. I agree that it kind of is in that same circle of rights and so forth. But the difference is, I think it seems to me that I don't have a problem with people owning a gun. I like the right to own a gun myself. And so I don't have a problem with that. But you don't get the right to shoot people in the ankle when they walk by.
Right.
Like, you can own a gun, but you can't harm other people with that gun. Now you've crossed the line. So can't we think of it in the same with the mask, which is if you're at home or you're on your property or you're in your car or you're outside in public places, those types of things, do whatever you want. But if you're going to go into someone's place of business, which they own, they get to tell you whether you should wear a mask or not, right? They get to tell you whether you wear a shirt.
Yeah.
Am I going to go into places without a shirt? I don't like wearing a shirt. The best way to not sweat through a shirt?
Not to wear one.
It's not to wear one.
Yeah.
I don't like I take the shirt off as much as possible. Andrew knows this. First thing I do when I get home, I kick off my shoes and socks and my shirt. But if I'm going to go to church, I'm going to wear a shirt. So what would be the best argument against that for people that still wouldn't agree with me if it's true that the virus spreads very readily, and even if the virus isn't, largely lethal, which it's not, thankfully.
Yeah.
It's still lethal to some, and it's still an inconvenience. It's still making someone sick and those types of things. So if the virus spreads very readily, and it mostly spreads through respiratory, and one decent way to limit exposure and the contagion is to have a cloth over your mouth. Help me out with the argument against that premise.
Man, I feel like I'm on debate club where I have to you have to pick you get assigned a side that you don't agree with. Because I agree with what you just said. And I haven't heard a coherent argument against that level of sort of, like you kind of paralleled it with gun ownership. You can own it. You can shoot it on your property in a safe context, legal ownership, whatever. So with the masks, you don't have to wear it in your own home around a group of people who are in agreement, whatever. It's hard to argue with that. It would probably be, so let's go back to the gun. If Tennessee tried to repeal concealed carry, so people, I don't know, a third of the cars that drive around Nashville have guns in them. I made that number up, but that's what I feel like when I see the level of road rage. I'm like, somebody's armed here. I'm going to back out of this one.
Yeah.
So if Tennessee tried to repeal that, which would be akin to saying now you have to wear masks in public.
Sure.
So we're taking rights into a public place. How would that be responded to by that crowd? Mm-hmm. I think there would be a strong, you're infringing on my rights. Mm-hmm. Even if the rationale was, no, you still get to own it. You can even take it to places where it's appropriate to shoot, hunting, gun range, whatever, just to be packed appropriately, ammo and guns separate in the trunk of your car, whatever. You get to use it appropriately. You just can't slap it on the Velcro underneath your truck seat.
Yeah.
I think the response would be almost exactly the same as, but you need to wear a mask in the grocery store.
Sure.
And again, I think there's a mindset, and I think it's a very American mindset, maybe more American South, or at least rural America, I'm not sure which, that the government, is there are limits on where the government can stop, or should stop telling me what to do. They need to draw the line here and tell me no further.
Yep.
And I think the difference is that the mask thing just doesn't cost anything. I think that's the part that leaves me a little bit more confused is because if they repealed concealed carry, it's actually a little bit more costly because maybe you bought a pistol and you went and got your carry license and whatever. Like there's a cost, there's time. A mask doesn't cost money or time or energy. It's just annoying.
The downside isn't great. Yeah, I agree with that. And just to be clear here, I hate wearing a mask. I don't like it at all. I mean, it's bothersome. It I feel like it constricts my oxygen intake a little bit. It is not something. I mean, I'm not proud to wear a mask. I'd never wear a mask unless I'm really supposed to. But I understand the argument for.
Yeah.
Now, the argument that you have heard, which I have not heard, which I feel like this argument may be more common in church circles, which is a little bit embarrassing, is the idea of wearing the mask out of fear. Like someone needs to call bullcrap on that, because why do you drive down the proper side of the road? Are you afraid? Why do you wear a seatbelt? Are you afraid? Like, why do you conduct yourself decently in society? Is that out of fear? No, it's out of reasonableness. It's how society works best. There's certain rules, and there's a lot of unspoken things in this society. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's, there's a fair bit of laws and things that are clear. And then there's a whole lot of things that are unspoken that we all do. Does it mean we're puppets? Does it mean we're robots? Does it mean we're about to be Nazis or whatnot because we're doing these unspoken things that culture has helped us and treated us kind of what's the term? Catechize us into doing, and that's how things work best here. That's just society. So to say like wearing a mask isn't good because you don't have faith and you're doing it out of fear that you might get sick, well, that's just, it's hard for me to see that argument standing up because there's a lot of things I do, including taking vitamins. Am I doing that out of fear? I'm doing that because I really don't want to get sick and I want to be healthy. Yeah, where would you draw the line on that argument?
Yeah, I think it's a theologically nonsensical argument, and I don't think it holds up logically for a lot of the reasons you just said. I've heard quote. I don't remember the exact Bible verse. I wish John Farmer was here. He's the best at pulling references, but. We will not do this in a spirit of fear. Or we won't do this. In the epistles, it talks about, we will not live in a spirit of fear. And like that gets claimed. I'm like, that's a phrase. You can't just grab things out of context. And so caution and fear are not the same thing.
Yeah.
Caution for the public good is very different than fear. And in fact, there's an element of courage in doing the inconvenient for what you deem to be the public good. It's the opposite of fear. There is something courageous about inconveniencing yourself for the public good. And frankly, I think we do a lot of things because the alternative is fearful.
Sure.
Why do we drive on the right side of the road? Because driving on the left side of the road is terrifying, and I don't want to die. I'm afraid of that. So am I driving on the right side of the road out of fear? I'm not afraid while I'm doing it. I'm in the right place. Those kinds of things. You talk about vitamins. Like, I think there's probably an element of we are fearful of our bodies breaking down. I don't like that thought. So I'm going to do healthy things. I'm going to take vitamins. I'm going to exercise. I'm going to whatever. So is that out of fear? No. But the alternative is fearful.
Yeah.
I don't wear a mask because I go through life fearful. I wear a mask because if I can avoid a fearful alternative or avoid spreading a fearful alternative, I think that's a good thing to do. And they're not the same thing.
Yeah, I agree. The fear argument also breaks down pretty quickly because I know a lot of people wear the mask not to protect themselves from the virus, but to protect other people should they have it and not know it. So now what do we say to that? Because they're not even doing it out of fear of themselves getting the virus. They're doing that out of concern so that if they had it and don't know, others don't get the virus.
Yeah. And then if you want to extend that, I've heard the argument applied to, we're being bullied by the state, so there's fear of that. There's fear of man. You're doing this out of pressure from your peers. And again, I guess that could be a motive. But also, like you said, if somebody walked into church and they weren't wearing a shirt and nobody said anything and they looked around and then like walked back out to their car and got a shirt, did we pressure them into that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just by kind of the cultural norm here is that we wear shirts at church.
Sure.
And so there is an element of that. And yeah, there's been a lot of shouting about it, but that's not doing something because the majority does it is not the same as fear of man.
Sure.
Maybe it's collective wisdom.
Maybe, and there's a lot of people, I would put myself in this category. I'm not doing it because the majority's doing it. I'm doing it because in certain places they want you to do it.
Right.
And so, I also think there's lots of people that do it for the signaling or whatever. An example would be, I like Formula One. And so they get these guys an hour and a half and you're coming out of those cars just shot. I mean, it's crazy how in shape these race drivers have to be, and they're very young. A lot of them are, because you don't make it if you're not fit. You can't make it through a race. So they're coming out and they are just sweating in their fire suit, and they're getting put in front of a mic and they're going to do an interview, and the interview is way over here and they're way over there. Excuse me, I don't know how far they are apart. But they
at least 6 feet.
Well, the interviewer is much farther apart than that, and they're having these poor guys wear a mask. So, like, that's to be politically correct. Let's just be honest. And when you see some people on news stations and so forth, like, there's no one near them, and they're wearing a mask.
They're doing like a walk and talk outside.
That's to be political correct,
right.
Or politically correct, or it's to signal to a certain people that you're on someone's camp. Like, that's ridiculous. Like, but there's no sense in that. And furthermore, if someone doesn't want to wear a mask or they are not going to for health reasons, that is 100% their prerogative. They can do what they want on their property. They can do what they want in their home, in their car. They can shop at certain stores that allow that. Or, I mean, I'm a little bit libertarian here, but look, if I'm not going to force someone to go to church. So if you're like set that you're not going to wear a mask, and the church says you need to wear a mask, I mean, my preference for you is that you just get over it and put a mask on and go to church. But I'm not going to make you do that. You have a right. Where it gets weird. So all I'm saying is, for people that don't want to wear a mask, that's your prerogative. That's fine. But then don't expect to take that right and inflict it on other people by going into your church or going into a public place where they require masks and kind of to prove a point, or you're just not going to do it. Either don't go into those places or just wear a mask.
There's a reason there's nudist colonies.
Exactly.
And it's because they have chosen to, like, that is the lifestyle of the things they will and will not wear. But that has to be done elsewhere, and they don't try to bring that into, I was about to say Walmart. They might try to bring it into Walmart. They're not trying to bring it into Kroger. Like there's just there's a limit on that, and there's a recognition of it. They're like, we are kind of outside of the public preference, so we're going to live in this colony. And there's masks are obviously not to that extreme, but there is don't take that preference into where it's not the public preference.
Yes. I think if early on, again, it's hard to know exactly where the blame lies, because when this thing, blew up in February and March, no one really knew that much about it. And so I understand all of that. Mm-hmm. But wouldn't have a good messaging point have been from both the right and the left and all of the parties? And the talking points is basically this. This can even come from Trump. Look, Americans, I'm about to ask you to do something you're not going to want to do. I know you Americans. This is what makes America great in a large sense. Like, you're free thinkers and you don't want to have people tread on you and you like to kind of have your rights. That's all well and good. Okay. So I'm going to ask you to do something that's going to make you uncomfortable. But we know that this spreads through our breathing and speaking. And so if I could be so, trepidatious here is to ask everyone to wear a mask when you're public places, that would really help with the common good, and that would really help with this public health crisis pandemic that we're all in the middle of. And if both parties could just reinforce that messaging instead of using the mask as a political thing, the no maskers, there would still be some of them, but there'd be a lot less.
Yeah. I mean, there's always going to be the fringe element, but I think that's true. I think if there had been a decision early on by the authoritative voices, be it the White House or any of the other political leaders, either side, to just track with the health officials. Because here's the thing, the health officials flip-flopped. And instead of our authoritative political voices saying, well, they've learned something new, so we're going to change, they looked at it as weakness, as a flaw. There was it caused consternation, mockery, conflict, whatever. Yeah, they just would have been like, well, now the recommendation is this. Yeah. Because they learned something. That's how science works. You learn stuff as you go. This is something none of us knows anything about. We're learning more and more all the time. So now we're asking you to do this. Yeah, I think it would have made a difference. And, a unified leadership voice is a real powerful force, because there will be those who dissent, but they don't have any allies in power. So they just sort of become the grumpy guy in the corner after a while. And you're like, fine, don't wear a mask over in the corner.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of weird how it got so polarizing and politicized.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like, well, I don't know. I don't know if it's as polarizing and politicized and weird as it is out in the general population, out of kind of a Christian church, Christian circles. There are certain things, and I don't know why this is, but there's certain things, viewpoints, conspiracies, opinions that tend to spread quicker in Christian circles.
Yeah.
And back in the day, maybe this is still the case, but back in the day, multi-level marketing things tended to flourish in Christian circles. Why? I don't know. That's a different. I have no idea why that is.
Yeah.
But we see it now with QAnon. It's popular in Christian circles for whatever reason. I'm not sure. So I don't know if the mask is one of those things. It's just touching on a nerve, whatever that is, to kind of flourish in those types of circles.
I think the mask thing got oddly biblicized as well. When people started attaching pseudo-biblical principles to it, it's one thing if you say you should and then I say I don't want to. Okay, well, we're not getting very far, but at least this is a very simplistic argument.
Yeah.
I don't want to do what you told me to. You would like me to do that. Now we're at an impasse. But when you start saying you're showing a spirit of fear, you're giving the devil a foothold, we're sacrificing our religious rights, you just took a simplistic, stubborn argument and elevated it to borderline heretical. You're starting to misuse the word of God to say some things, and we've moralized something that's really a matter of kindness and kind of basic societal good, as opposed to, you might disagree it's for societal good, but that's the question.
Yeah.
Not, are you in sin?
Well, that's an interesting point. I'm glad you brought that up, because in my opinion, that is the best argument for or against the mask. It's I don't want to wear it. You want me to. Well, we're at an impasse, right. So we're gonna need to go our ways or do whatever we got to do to still get along, still love each other, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
I'm cool with that. That is totally fine. I'm not, because I think you can get it weird on both sides. I think it's ridiculous when people wear a mask when they're not around anyone, unless they want to. They can do whatever they want. Yeah. But I think that's the best argument here, or that's how it should actually play out. Is you want to, person A wants to, person B doesn't. You give your viewpoints and you walk away. When you start to bring in scripture and those other weird things in a weird way, great things in a weird way, the problem with that then is when I start to reinforce my views on why, let's just say if I were to do this, on why I should wear a mask, it doesn't matter, or not. Now you are going to trust me less when I'm talking about something that does matter and the scripture actually does speak to. Yeah. And you see this when people start using scripture to reinforce personal opinions, and you have scripture speaking to things that scripture does not speak to. The issue there is you lose credibility with all of scripture, in my opinion.
I guess
because if you're going to use scripture in an incorrect way, and there's going to be people that agree with you, and they're going to get all on board, and you're going to have this little thing, this little camp where it's scripture does say that, and you're all rah-rah and high-fiving and everything. But for people that disagree, and scripture's actually not speaking to that, now I don't really care what you say scripture has to say about hate or really anything else, because you're misusing it over here. Why would I trust how you're using it over there?
Yeah.
So we need to be real careful when we start to pull that scripture speaking to the mask. That's...
Yeah, and there are so many foundational verses that should dictate how we interact with one another that eliminate the opportunity for dissent. Or contentiousness. Dissent is one thing. Dissent just means disagreement. But love your neighbor as yourself. Do everything without grumbling and complaining. Consider others before yourself. Like you just get the list of these verses. All of those disallow contentiousness over something as stupid as masks.
Yeah.
And they don't disallow, they don't cut disagreement out, but they cut animosity out.
Yeah.
And yet here we are.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, everyone says they're following the science, but that's just what we need to do, right? I mean, look, if the science comes out and it's like, oh, guys, we had it wrong once again, and this doesn't spread through respiratory, this spreads when you touch something that someone else touched or you shake hands. Well, then at that point, no one needs to wear a mask if we know that for a fact. Mm-hmm. But if this is spreading through respiratory, we only have one mouth, y'all. Like you don't have to cover up your armpits. You don't have to cover your eyes. Like it's through your mouth. Like if you can just cover that because that's the way it's spreading, it just makes sense logically to me. And again, I don't like to wear it more than I need to. Like it's not a thing that I like to do whatsoever. But if that's what the science is saying, it makes sense logically that Whole Foods would say, you guys can shop anywhere you want. We don't have a problem with that. But if you want to shop at Whole Foods downtown Nashville, you need to come in here with a mask on. I mean, I don't own that building. So I either at that point need to put on a mask or go somewhere else. Like that just seems basic.
I mean, like when you go to somebody's house and they're like, hey, would you mind taking your shoes off? I don't know. That's not a thing that happens in the South. In the North, it happens all the time because it's snowy half the year.
Yeah.
Like, you walk in, you forget, and they're like, hey, do you mind taking your shoes off? You're not like, no, I have a right to wear shoes in your home. It's a touch of the same.
Yeah, it really is. Hoping for happiness. Congratulations, man.
Well, thank you.
But you also did you publish 2 books this year?
Well, I cheated. Hoping for Happiness is brand new. Help My Unbelief and The Pastor's Kid re-released this year, but they're older books.
Okay, so The Pastor's Kid did re-release this year.
Yes.
Help My Unbelief
re-released in January. Okay. Pastor's Kid re-released in June, and nobody noticed because in June we were all isolating and not paying attention to books.
Yep.
So those are a few years old, and then they re-released.
What year did you write The Curious Christian?
Came out in 2017, so 3 years ago.
Oh, okay. All right, so Hoping for Happiness, and is this mine to keep, by the way?
It is yours to keep.
Okay, thank you very much. What's the book about? I didn't read it yet.
That's fair since I just gave it to you now. Had you read it, I would have been very impressed. It's trying to find a mindset, a framework of understanding for what is realistic happiness in this life. So kind of pulling against 2 extremes. So I came out of a conservative Christian background where happiness is often something that people are suspicious of. Too much enjoyment is potentially worldly. Happiness is something trite. Happiness is often attached to things that are a waste of time, that are temptations. So now there's a heavy emphasis on joy as if that's a different thing than happiness.
Right.
I touch on that in the book. I don't think they're that different. But so there's that side, and I grew up in that, and I just perpetually was like, but happiness is great. And also, I don't think God would have made like bacon if he didn't want us to be happy. Mm-hmm. I don't think God would have made music if he didn't want us to be happy. I don't think God would have told us over and over again to find gladness and rejoice. Like rejoicing doesn't mean sing at church. Rejoicing means have this like bubbling overflow of happiness. Mm-hmm. So, and it might express itself in singing, it might express itself in poetry or laughter or a lot of different things. So I just look at that and I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why are we suspicious of happiness? Then the flip side is the worldly, and when I say worldly, I just mean like sort of the non-Christian general frame of mind that is perpetually chasing the next pleasure. You get into a job and you're dissatisfied after a year, 2 years, and you want the next thing. You want to fulfill all your dreams in your job. You bounce from relationship to relationship, whatever the case may be. There's always a next happiness that's better than the current one. And I said, well, that doesn't sound great either. Mm-hmm. It's exhausting. It's a spin cycle of disappointment. So what is realistic? And so I looked heavily at Ecclesiastes. You brought Ecclesiastes up earlier because I think Ecclesiastes is just the most grounded book in the Bible looking at, it's basically Solomon saying, look, y'all, I tried everything. Here's what I learned. Mm-hmm. And he starts by saying, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. And that doesn't mean everything is meaningless. It just means nothing lasts.
Yep.
So vanity could be translated as like vapor of vapors. It's a wisp. It's just gone. And then he goes through and he's like, I tried sex, tried money, tried work, tried drink, tried everything, both good and sinfully. And he says, none of them will fulfill, but they're all great if they take their proper place. Mm-hmm. And then kind of he just sums up with this is the what is it? This is the full command or the full measure of man is to fear God and keep His commands. Mm-hmm. And so there's a simplicity to life, but also we can find pleasure. Just don't expect the wrong things out of it.
Yes.
Expect the right things. Expect the things that God intended out of it.
Yep.
So that's the gist of it. Is just what does it mean to be happy in this life when nothing lasts, but there are good things?
Yes, 100%. I was looking forward to talking about this book with you and I'm looking forward to reading it because this is a subject matter that I feel like I have questions about. Like, yeah. I feel like I need to learn and grow in this area, honestly. You also said something, was it in relation to this book or somewhere, something along the lines of being a recovering cynic?
Yeah.
So I guess my question kind of is, of all the books you could write and all the topics, why this one? And does that have anything to do with being a recovering cynic?
Yeah, the recovering cynic is kind of the mindset I brought to it. So I would say for a long time, my mentality was to kind of, it put a ceiling on happiness because cynicism is not the same thing as pessimism. Pessimism is, well, this isn't going to work. And it's just sort of a perpetual Eeyore, sunny now, but it's going to rain mentality. And cynicism is more like looking at good things and going, yeah, but there's also, you kind of find the downside to stuff a little bit. And there's the we got to consider this thing. And the way that it plays itself out is that you never throw yourself into something fully. Because you hold back in case something's not quite great. So there's if you give 90% to something and it doesn't work out, you can always blame the 10% you didn't give.
Sure.
If you give 100% to something and it doesn't work out, you don't have anyone to blame.
Yeah, it's true.
You're like, well, I gave it everything I had and it didn't work.
Yep.
And the same is true for enjoyment. You kind of hold back a little bit of yourself. And then if it's not a great experience, you're like, well, I protected myself.
Yes.
Whereas if you've given yourself 100% to this and it doesn't work out, it feels more disappointing. So that's what I mean by recovering cynic. There's just sort of that perpetual withholding of full expectations for good things. Something's always going to go just a little off. And I always said I was a realist. And there's a touch of truth in that because realistically, in a fallen world, things don't always work out right. So a cynic might be realistic sometimes. But a realist also says you have to look realistically at God and at the fallen world. And so if you're realistically looking at God, you do say, I need to give 100% of myself to enjoying the things of God, to pursuing the things of God, to taking the risk that may end in disappointment. So that's kind of the mindset when I talk about recovering cynic. And I think I wrote the book just because, I was so tired of being disappointed in different things, and I was trying to figure out why I was disappointed so often, and came to realize that so much of it had to do with my expectations. I was expecting the wrong things of whatever, of a hamburger or a marriage, you can do it on the small or the big scale. And so what are realistic expectations? What does God want me to expect of a cheeseburger or of a marriage or of a church? And that just, so I started to chew on that and figure out, what does Scripture have to say? And it was profoundly freeing. And it started to kind of rightly order things where God wants me to expect this, but not this. You know, he gives me this wonderful food to give pleasure, but not to give pleasure tomorrow. Mm-hmm. You know, today's dinner doesn't please me tomorrow at 3 p.m. It's just for now. That was today's good gift. So enjoy it for today. And then tomorrow brings its own gifts or troubles, you know, we'll find out. And so some of that. But then another piece of it was also, what does happiness look like when life is just an absolute mess? Went through a divorce a few years ago, 2016. And, you know, it's finding happiness in the midst of that. I wasn't thinking about this systematically then. That was just more holding on for dear life is what it felt like more than anything. But coming out of that and going, well, what does it look like to be happy again? Because I thought this was the thing that was going to make me happy as I got older, and now it's gone.
Yep.
So what does happiness look like now? Because I never lost the conviction that God was good and faithful. And so if God is good and faithful and I have the rest of my life ahead of me, I didn't think it was bleak. It just was blank.
Okay.
So what did it look like to figure out happiness in light of that disappointment, that misery? And so it was born a lot out of that as well. Like that process of discovering a kind of a level-headed, foundational sort of happiness.
Mm-hmm. So did your future look blank in 2016 or 2017? I'm sure there's just a period where going through that divorce, there's just a fog, you know, you don't know what to feel or think or do or any kind of vision for the future. But then when you start to think about the future and start to have some kind of coherent thoughts, the future did look blank and not bleak, which is I guess that's kind of surprising to me. I would have thought maybe I'm more familiar with the bleak.
I think there's a lot of reasons it was not totally bleak, and all of them are testaments to God's goodness. One was my kids. So I have two daughters, and as long as they loved me and I loved them, and I had a reason to get up every day and go about my business, and it was to make sure that their life stayed on track. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I have joint custody with their mom, and so, you know, they're not with me all the time, but I'm 100% their dad. Right. So I need to give 100% of my thoughts in that direction. So, and their future is not bleak. So how demeaning would it be for me to act as if there was nothing worth living for when their future is worth living for, if nothing else? And there was more than that. But some days, like, that was it. Yeah. I had a really good job at the time. You know, one that I enjoyed my coworkers. I was good at it. And it was a Christian company who the people there were supportive and understanding. And so there was provision. Like, God's provision for me was really good. I didn't lose everything in terms of the security of, like, I have a home, I have a paycheck, I can pay my bills, I'm good. And there's a lot to be thankful for there. And then the third thing was just an awareness that, like, I'd been through some various hard times before, mostly of my own making. And I just seen God come through too many times to look ahead and go, well, I think he's dropped the ball this time. Mm-hmm. Like, no, he didn't. I just don't know what he's going to do. Yep. I didn't know how to think about the future. So when I say blank, I had confidence that God had a future for me. Mm-hmm. I just had no idea what it was, because everything that had been painted in my mind was built around taking this family into that future.
I see.
And so when that was erased, it had to be reconstructed in a way that I didn't know how to construct.
Sure. Yeah. That makes total sense. A divorce like that is, oh man, does that feel like a death? Does it feel worse than a death in some ways?
Yeah, I think it feels worse than a death in some ways. And for anybody listening who's lost a loved one, I do not mean to diminish that. I think they're probably different kinds of pain. But the difference is that death is final. When a death happens, there is a clarity to moving on. Not an ease, but there's a clarity to it. You must come to terms with a new reality. A divorce doesn't feel like that, especially when you're not the one who wanted it. Now, you might be able to leave a spouse behind and say, I'm just moving on. That sounds ridiculous to me. But I mean, to the day it was finalized, I was praying that it wouldn't happen. So then the day it was finalized, like a light switch just doesn't go off and go, well, that's done.
Right.
There's a massive adjustment to figuring out what it looks like. And then there are kids and joint custody and also just what does it look like to be an honorable Christian man towards, again, this situation? I didn't want my ex-wife to be my enemy.
Sure.
That nobody wins, especially not the kids, but nobody wins. So there's a tie to the past that can't be broken the way that death breaks a tie. Mm-hmm. Now, I think the breaking of that tie in death is a different sort of pain. Mm-hmm. So like that's a gut-wrenching thing. But yeah, I think in some ways it's worse than a death in those sort of complicated, like a protracted process of just dealing with a new reality like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. And also like just having to face the fact that they don't want to be married to you anymore seems hard to handle too, in its own way.
Yeah.
And then also you mentioned expectations, and it just occurs to me also that this is not a one-size-fits-all situation, because in some situations it's like divorce happened, and let's just take an example where someone doesn't even believe in God, or they're not even going to church, and that's in some divorces, in some of those settings, it's a little bit more like, well, yeah, it's just, it didn't work out, so we're separate. Well, in your situation, this is like, conservative evangelical church, and things are expected of you. Well, then you also have the thing of being John Piper's son, I assume, and then you have some of those expectations, and so it could be that your situation is maybe in some ways more difficult than some, and maybe in some ways not as difficult as others, but
yeah, I think one of the things that in which God showed a lot of grace was the people around me. I didn't face a lot of judgment. I feared a lot of judgment.
Oh yeah.
And I got some, but it was almost all from people I didn't know, which if you get negative comments from people you don't know, they're the easiest ones to ignore.
Sure.
Just report spam. And they're gone.
Yep.
Or block them on Twitter or whatever. But nobody had the stones to say negative things to my face. And the friends, the Christian friends, the Christian community I had. And then, so I came to Immanuel coming out of that situation a few months later after it had been finalized, so mid-2017. And quickly got folded into a community that was just non-judgmental on that. Nobody was sitting down and quizzing me to figure out like what percent guilty are you, or those kinds of things that the Christian church has a propensity to do sometimes.
Sure.
Or just sort of treating it like a scarlet letter, like he's divorced, he's a problem. So I didn't face a lot of that, thankfully. My parents were. When I say supportive, I don't mean like they liked the divorce or spoke ill of my ex-wife or anything. They prayed for restoration the whole time as well, but supportive in that they loved me throughout. Mm-hmm. There was no hint of like, if you don't get this straightened out, then there will be a judgment, consequence, writing you out of the will, whatever. And so like I just never doubted that their praying presence for me either. And that, all of that I look back on and go, man, I'm thankful because bearing up under that would have just added hardship for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm glad you wound up at Immanuel that soon after. I hadn't known that because Immanuel's a good place to come to if you're beat up.
Yeah.
Was the divorce the primary kind of motivation behind this book, or?
No, it was kind of the culmination.
Okay.
I would say that there's kind of been just different chapters in my own life of figuring out, like, pursuing happiness badly, pursuing it in sin, pursuing it in good things, but making ultimate things out of good things, wanting professional advancement too much, wanting money too much, wanting whatever. So, and those are not bad things, like doing well at your job, getting promoted, like, good, but also that's not the be all end all.
Yep.
Marriage was probably the most profound one because it touches on so many aspects of life. It touches on, relational fulfillment, what you expect out of the future, sex life, just kind of all of these things that people turn to for, I expect happiness out of this.
Yes, true.
And then when it's gone, a lot of things you look to for happiness are now either gone or rearranged and have to be reordered correctly, or in a lot of people's cases, not reordered correctly. So it was the culmination, but it was the kind of the realization that marriage isn't a monolithic thing. It's this comprehensive thing that covers physical, mental, spiritual, well-being, health, expectations, how we view the future. What are we looking for in the future? Even how we think about work.
Yeah.
Work changed for me after I got divorced because I didn't have anybody to think about except me. Like, I needed to pay the bills for myself and to make sure my kids were taken care of. But all of a sudden I was like, I just make whatever decisions I want about what happens next, kind of thing. And so there's those kinds of things. Like, there's just, marriage ought to provide a framework for every decision we make.
Yep.
When it goes away, your framework goes away.
Yep.
So what is your framework?
Yes. Oh, that's a good point. Now, I'm kind of curious about the sex life thing, and I don't want to be inappropriate or have you kind of share anything,
right,
that is weird to share on the podcast. But I'm curious because you're married, and so you had a sex life, and then you don't. Like, how do you work through that? That seems difficult. Is it like, well, this is a good gift from God, and in a marriage structure, that's a very wonderful thing. It's designed by God, and so that I had that first season, and now I don't, and so I'm just going to have to sort of work through this and kind of deal with it. Or how do you work through that?
Man, if only it was that easy. There's not an off switch to that. I mean, for men, I don't think we have an off switch, period. And I don't mean that in like men are pigs, but just like just the drive is always there to some degree. I was in one relationship shortly after getting divorced that it didn't go very well. And coming out of that relationship, so jumping back into dating too soon, because really it's not smart to date right after you get divorced. Coming out of that relationship was, so divorce, dated too soon, come out of that relationship. That's when I started to get a real clear understanding of what did God intend? Why did God intend sex to be in marriage and not any other way?
Sure.
Because in marriage, you can take it for granted and you can almost cheapen it. Because you're like, we just get to do this thing, and then you can get bored with it, or it becomes fetishized, or it becomes an idol, as if it's not going well, or if one wants it and the other doesn't, or whatever, and it takes a place it shouldn't, as opposed to a place of kind of beautiful union and, expression of how much you love and are invested in one another. It becomes it's an object of desire. And
right.
That's not what it ought to be. So, and I, in a dysfunctional marriage, there's dysfunctional sex life. Usually the two go hand in hand. And so, coming out of what wasn't a relationship at the right time or in the right way, from that point on, so, early 2017 on, it really became something that I started to pay a lot more attention to. I'd known all the Bible verses about it, but now I think I really started to get them in terms of when people say it's a good gift that God had designed, that's what that means.
Yeah, interesting.
When people say it's for this and it means this, that's what that means.
Yeah.
And it shifted my perspective. And I got remarried a couple months ago, and it's through our entire dating and engagement relationship and now into marriage, that period of time, so from 2017 to 2019, a couple years there, was so foundational in me being ready to handle it well in this relationship, both pre-marriage and during marriage, and to not fetishize and not idolize and not cheapen either my wife or sex itself.
Yep.
And I think those are not things I understood the way that God intended prior.
Yeah. So it's almost like through that crucible of suffering by experiencing a particular good gift and then not, and then maybe one day hoping for that again, but then having to deal with that kind of in between and just making it through and trusting God and all of this, like there's still like, there's a benefit to going through difficult things like that, you know? I've heard Ray say one time that as in terms of like, what did God have in mind with like our sensuality or sexuality or even sex drive, I guess, aside from procreation? I mean, the comment that I've heard him made before is it's a great motivator, you know, like it does, let's be honest, like it does drive you to go get a job and to have your life in order and to be building for a brighter future and those types of things. Like there is a motivation around sex that doesn't have a direct connection to sex. Like it bleeds out into other areas of life.
I think that's true when sex has not been cheapened. I think society has kind of undermined a lot of that because like sex is just, digital sex is available whenever you want it.
Right.
And sex of the non-committal variety is available with relative ease.
Yes.
You know, like you can find somebody if that's what you're looking for. But if you want any fulfillment out of a meaningful relation, like a meaningful sexual relationship, what you just said is true, or what Ray said is true.
Yes. Well, that's actually a great point. I'm glad you brought that up because you're right. If you're just going to porn, let's just say, well, that's not, I mean, but if you have to, back in the day, you know, you had to have the guts to talk to a girl and then you had to get her to like you. And then you had to find a car, you know, borrow a car and dress up and go out and find a movie and those types of things. You know, and furthermore, you have to like learn some life skills, you know, because if you can't talk to anyone and you have nothing interesting to say, then she's probably not going to want to go out with you. And if she does, it's not going to last long. It's like all of that, like, so that's, I guess, where that motivation or that sensuality or sexuality can be a good motivator. But if it's just going to, you know, online porn, for example, then that's a different thing entirely.
Yeah, and I think one of the things about sex that is so hard to articulate is, I mean, setting aside the societal sort of availability and diminishment of the value of sex, just the complete cheapening and availability of it. But even within a Christian context, so you're raising kids, you're talking to them about what is, you know, sex is a gift from God in marriage between a man and a woman, all of which is right. It's really hard to explain the, what's the word I'm looking for? How good the gift is, I guess. And I don't mean like the pleasure necessarily as much as like the what the gift gives back in a healthy, unified, committed marriage.
Right.
You know, what the place of this thing is in making two people one. You know,
Yeah.
Paul calls marriage a mystery. Some aspect of that is the sexual union.
Yeah, you're right. It's a good point.
But out of that, there's also a spiritual union and a relational union and I put this person first and all of that kind of thing. And sex is a real significant aspect of that. I don't know how you explain that to somebody who hasn't committed themselves to it and then started to figure it out.
Yes. Yeah, you're right. How are you doing on time? Are you okay right now, or should we wrap this thing up quick?
I'm good. I got a little bit longer.
I wanted to ask you something. Oh, happiness and joy. Well, first of all, the idea that happiness is, somewhat kind of dirty, I guess, if you will, in some circles. Like I resonate with that. Like I feel like and also I wonder if that was a more popular viewpoint, like in the 90s. I don't know. I could be wrong. Maybe it's still probably prevalent now. But I definitely resonate with that. And then also the splitting of happiness and joy. So that I've heard and kind of thought that's the way that it's supposed to be, or that's the way that it is. But you're pushing back on that a little bit.
Yeah.
How do you think about happiness and joy?
Well, I think the easiest way to answer that is for me to pose a question in return. So think about somebody who talks about joy often. They're committed to joy. They teach about joy. They think joy is a high value. And they're a miserable person. Like, what is that joy? What does that even mean? Mm-hmm. Like, joy without a smile on your face, joy without laughter, joy without a sense of humor, joy without taking pleasure in the experiences of life is really, what is that thing? Mm-hmm. It sounds like a theological term that has no basis in reality to me. So there's a version of happiness that has no correlation to godly joy. Just the pursuit of pleasure. Temporal pleasure is kind of finding meaning in that. That's a sort of happiness. You go to Broadway in Nashville on a Friday night and people are happy. They're really happy right up until about 7 a.m. when their alarms go off the next morning and they have to catch a flight home, and then they're miserable because that happiness didn't deliver. But it's real. It's a version. Well, I'm talking about the kind of happiness where we expect the right things out of what God gives, and I don't think there's much difference than joy. I think you can have happiness in the midst of suffering. Like when I was going through a divorce, when I was in that period of time afterwards where life was very just uncertain. I didn't know what was happening. I still found happiness. Like I still had a sense of humor. I still had friends who I could really enjoy the company of. Like food didn't lose its taste. I loved being outside. In the fall in Tennessee is just amazing, and those kinds of things are all still there. Like there's happiness in the midst of suffering because there's gratitude there. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like there's in the midst of it, there's looking around and going, God gave me this. Mm-hmm. I get to be grateful for this thing in the midst of a time that it can be very hard to be grateful for.
Yeah.
And in that way, happiness and joy overlap. And so the only way to separate those two things is to misdefine happiness. That's something that I think is too cheap and too small. So that's more or less the answer. I think people, I think somewhere along the way people separated the two so that they could say, this is a false pursuit of pleasure. This is a good pursuit of pleasure. So they attached happiness to one and joy to the other. But I think that's splitting hairs and misdefining terms.
Interesting. So there is a difference between happiness and pleasure seeking, which you alluded to earlier. Pleasure seeking can go very bad very quickly.
Yeah. I think pleasure seeking is expecting the wrong things out of good gifts, generally speaking. So, for example, let's go back to the Broadway on a Friday night example. Like, I don't have anything against grabbing a drink or enjoying the company of a beautiful woman or great music or whatever. But if you're expecting the wrong things out of that, and so you get hammered, you're just there to get laid. The music thing, that's probably more just accelerating the other stuff. And or maybe you're in the band and the adulation you're receiving is all of your fulfillment. Like you just end up empty.
Sure. Yes.
Whereas if you're there expecting a really fun evening, like you go down there with friends or with your wife or whatever, and you have some drinks and you listen to some music and you eat some food and you go home and you're like, man, that was amazing. You're really happy and you didn't expect the wrong things out of this. You expected God to enjoy the things that God created, and you did, and ta-da, happy.
Yes. Yeah, that's okay. That's put very well. It's like one chocolate chip cookie is like heaven, and 6 is disgusting.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the 5 after the first tastes very good, but then you're like, oh, that's stupid.
But 40 minutes later, you don't think so.
Exactly. Yeah. And then the next morning, you're like, dang, what did I do? And you have this sense of guilt. And I only say that because recently we made some very good chocolate chip cookies, and they were very large and they were very good. And I should have had just one.
The pictures, and
but
so
I had more than one.
I was jealous, which I also don't think was very godly, but they did look really good.
They were so good. Was there anything that you learned as you thought through, researched, learned more about this concept of happiness that was surprising to you? That you didn't expect that's the way it is, but as you researched and learned, it's like, no, that's the way it is, and that's a surprise to me.
If there was one thing that was surprising, it was probably how mortality informs happiness. Just so much of the worldly pursuit of happiness is in an effort to deny the fact that it's all coming to an end. And Christians are not bound by that. So mortality physically, but then also the freedom of eternal life, which is a big part of what Ecclesiastes is about. The living now for the future. So, and what that means is we get to maximize our present life with an eye towards eternal life. So it doesn't cheapen, but neither is it eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. It's not sort of the nihilistic, nothing has meaning sort of thing. And so the coming to terms with the reality of death frees us up to be happy in an entirely different way that we couldn't be otherwise. I mean, I'm trying to think. I don't remember what book it was, but it was, it might have been Gates of Fire by Stephen Pressfield. Have you read it?
I don't think so.
Okay. It's about the 300 at the Battle of Thermopylae. It's a novel, but it's
I started that book. It's a novel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't finish it.
Oh man, you should. It's brilliant. But the way that he writes, I think it's in that book. He talks about the joy of battle for some of these guys.
Yeah.
And there's a sense of like their purpose in living is so clear, and they had a belief in an afterlife. Like, I don't think that they were right, but like the future freedom enabled them to just find relish in the work that they were called to in this life, the stuff that they were doing. And except for a Christian, it's all real. Like, we have real eternal life with real perfect joy. And so there's just a freedom in it, because death doesn't make us like panic now. Like, I have to fill up this life with all the pleasures because it's all I've got. Neither does it say, well, this life isn't really worth enjoying, so I'm just going to ride it out until the next one. Like, no, you just make the most of it. Yeah. And then you get to the better one.
That's a very interesting observation. I did not expect that, but I can totally see it, and it's pretty profound. I'm reading a book right now called The Denial of Death, and now I can't think of the author, which is not good. He was a philosopher who died at a young age. I think he died at like between 35 and 40.
Okay.
Can you try to find the author of The Denial of Death? Beckett, I think Ken Beckett, maybe. But what you're saying about mortality having an effect on our view of happiness is absolutely true. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's talking in there about how much we do out of just this need to just like not think about the fact that we are going to die one day.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so Christians should think about happiness very differently than a non-believer who thinks they're just going to die and that's just the end of everything. I think of it differently. Here's what you hear: the denial of death. Who's the author? Ernest Becker.
The author is Ernest Becker.
Ernest Becker. Yeah, Ernest Becker. Thanks. Phenomenal book, and it's touching on a lot of different things because, as it turns out, the fear of death that fingers out into almost everything. So it's a fascinating book. It's not a quick read, but I'm really enjoying it. And but it's I've heard I don't know if it's from certain camps or if it's kind of popular in some of these things kind of have their turn, it seems like in Christian circles, but this idea of like you get one life and like it's one life, live it well, live it as best you can, like you only get one shot at this, that creates this sort of, I think, unwise. It's true we only have one life. That's true, but we're not going to be here on earth for 100 years, 80 years, 105 years, whatever it winds up being, and then poof, be in some other form floating around in clouds. Like, so my perception on this back in my 20s, I would have thought more in terms of you get one life to live, be the best, experience it all, travel the world, experience all of these things because you only have 100 years here on earth. Fill up your tank, boy. I don't think that way anymore. I would still like to do some travel in my day, if and when I can, because I love to get out and see new places and experience new cultures and new food and new mountainsides. I mean, there's so much nature that I'd love to see. However, here's how I think now. If I don't get it done in my 80 years or 100 years, I have eternity to get it done. It's the new heavens and the new earth, baby.
Yeah, and it's going to be a better one too. I mean, the beautiful things will just be more beautiful. At least the way that I understand new heavens and new earth is a recreation, not a destruction and then like something else.
Yeah. So, if I don't get to see all parts of the world, in this one life, I intend to keep seeing that world in the new heavens and the new earth. So.
Yeah, and I think one way to think about happiness, I don't think I wrote it this way in the book, but there's sort of a like practicing for heaven mentality. Like if you believe in a new heavens and a new earth that are going to be an eternity of no pain, no sorrow, no tears, and the Revelation depicts a wedding feast. Like there's a real earthy tangibleness to that. Like if that's the new heavens and the new earth, it is living with resurrected bodies, then we should probably get really good at enjoying things well now. Yeah, and I don't mean glutting ourselves on them. I mean appreciating them.
Yes.
Because I think we carry experiences and knowledge, the knowledge of God that we grow in. Like there's a reason to mature as a Christian as opposed to just like, I'm going to skate through and then like get it right at the end of my life. Mm-hmm. And it's because we carry that whatever maturity we bring, that whatever experiences into heaven, so that like heaven is, we more fully experience it. Sam Storms was one of my professors in college, and somebody was asking him about that, and he said, so are you saying that some people have like a more perfect heaven? And he said, no, everybody has maximum enjoyment in heaven. It's just that some people start with a thimble of enjoyment and it grows over eternity. Some people start with an ice cream bucket of enjoyment and it grows over eternity. And some people start with a swimming pool of enjoyment because of what they bring in. So it's always overflowing. Mm-hmm. It's just what do you have the capacity to enjoy? And then he made the point, he said, and after about 1 billion years, the difference between a thimble and a swimming pool is pretty negligible.
Yeah.
So I was like, that's a good point.
Yeah.
But that helped me also just think, there's value in all of the Christian growth in this life, both in, enjoyment of good things and in dealing with suffering and in growing in knowledge of the word and so forth.
Yep. 100%. Do you want to read some up there, Andrew?
Just good applicable verses to that very thing. The one that came to my mind was straight from Ecclesiastes 9, verse 7, and this is the ESV version. Go eat your bread with joy and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do. Let your garments always be white. Let not oil be lacking on your head. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love, all the days of your vain life that he has given you under the sun, because that is your portion in life, and in your toil at which you toil, It goes on, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. But then it ends, for there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol to which you are going. So that's real. And in short, what that is saying is go enjoy your life because it won't last.
Yep.
Exactly as Barnabas was saying.
Well, then verse 7 where he says, right, you read it right at the beginning, where God has already approved what you do. I mean, there's a rubber stamp of approval on the work, the marriage, the pleasure. Like, these are things that God's like, I made these, I gave these, will you please enjoy them?
It's true. It's true. I'm embarrassed to say this, but again, in my 20s, and there was a season of life where I kind of was all about the success, all about the, like, self-growth and development, and there's a trajectory, and what's going to be my best life by 40, and I need to be working towards that and everything. And I mean, it started out great until I felt kind of the shallowness of it all just kind of creeping into my soul, to be honest. But I even would poo-poo like good things, like people that took time to eat some good food over lunch. Like, I'm not going to stoop to that, or like take a half a day to barbecue meat on a Saturday, or to watch football for half the day. I was like, dude, those people need to get some goals in life. I'm just head down working over here. And you know what? Now I see, like that is life. Like, relax, dude. Enjoy that food. Yeah. Enjoy that smoked meat. Enjoy that football. Enjoy hugging your 2-year-old daughter, and looking in her bright blue eyes, and just kind of having that moment while yes, tomorrow you might have something going on at work that you're concerned about, or you might have issues in your life, but right here's your 2-year-old daughter. Like, you have to be able to enjoy that while you still have the cares of this world, so to speak, kind of in a portion of your mind. That's just how life is.
Yeah, and Christians can do that. So you're talking about kind of the pursuing self, kind of self-growth, professional growth. You can do it just as much in burying yourself in the Word, or like theological education, theological knowledge, pursuit of ministry over the exact same things. There's whether you're a pastor or just a Christian who's very intense, kind of intensely seeking to grow, you can miss out on things that God intends for you by spending too much time trying to find the things God intends for you.
Yeah.
Because you've limited you've limited how God delivers those things.
Yeah.
If you only think that God delivers good things through theological study, you have missed the entire doctrine of creation. When God said 6 times in Genesis, God made this and it was good. Like, the goodness didn't go away. It just got tainted.
Yes.
There's a lot of goodness.
Yep. You're totally right. Totally right. Anything else about the book that was, I guess, particularly meaningful to you, or that's going to stick with you?
Yeah, I think the thought that I keep having about it, as the same is true with my other books, is it's like an accountability metric for me. Everything I'm just saying to you, I didn't write this from a place of I have arrived. It's more like I have discovered. But now I have to figure out how to perpetually, you talk about enjoying hugging your 2-year-old daughter, or, whatever. Like, I have to push myself into that daily, because my bent is to rush past good things, to not pause and enjoy, to not be grateful. So there's an accountability in writing this for me that I have to live up to. And the same is true, with books about faith and doubt and whatever. Like, dude, I have to live up to the things that I say, hey, you should believe this stuff. Okay, do I live like I do? I think that's what will stick with me as much as anything, is not, like, I didn't write it and wash my hands of it. I wrote it and was like, oh, this is kind of a metric for how am I living my life as a faithful believer now? Yeah,
absolutely. Is it weird to have things out there that you've written? Do you ever write something such a long time ago that's like, man, if I could find all those books, or if I could find and burn them, or if I could, you know what I mean? Like, if I could just take down that blog post, do you experience that?
I have taken down some blog posts.
Well, on your own, of course, but I'm saying, like, you write something and it's like out there and you can't take it down, or is that not something you have too much experience with?
I thankfully, I have avoided saying anything that I have, like, hence come to think is, heretical or something. For me, it's more like I wasn't a very good writer 7 years ago. or 10 years ago. And so I look back and I go, oof, that was sloppy.
Yeah.
No, I actually had the chance to read the audiobooks for my 2 oldest books earlier this summer because they were
that's
re-releasing.
cool. Which ones? The Pastor's
the Pastor's Kid and Help My Unbelief. I did the audiobooks for them. And so like I had to reread them to do that, obviously. And going through them, I was like, I pretty much stand by all this. Mm-hmm. I think my writing has advanced. I think I'm a better writer now. But the message of them, I go, I still feel good about putting these in people's hands.
Yeah.
Which is good. I don't want to have a book in print that I'm
good.
Embarrassed by.
That is positive. My understanding is that you met J.I. Packer one time.
I did.
One time or multiple or...
multiple times. I only really remember one time, though.
Okay. What was he like in person? Very soft-spoken, very kind of quiet? Or
quiet, but not shy quiet, just understated. He's scholarly, so but he is really funny. Like he's had sort of a dry, understated sense of humor.
Okay.
But just a gentle, kind man. Like I've met a lot of who would be considered famous Christian pastors, thinkers, whatever. A few of them have that I don't want to say aura. That sounds weird.
I think it probably works.
The way that they carry themselves, their countenance has sort of the peace of God. Like this man walks with God. Mm-hmm. That sense about him, and he was one of those guys. Where there was just Jerry Bridges was another.
Okay.
And it's especially striking when they're older guys. So I met Jerry Bridges when he was probably late 70s, and J.I. Packer when he was at a big publishing event. It was to celebrate his 80th birthday. So
okay,
and just this man is infused with the Holy Spirit.
Yeah,
and not because he's speaking in tongues, but just you hang on every word. His humor is kind of perfectly uplifting.
Yeah.
It lifts spirits, but it doesn't demean anyone, which is not a thing I'm good at. And so, there's just he was like that. He was everything you hoped the guy who wrote Knowing God would be.
That's cool. That book, Ray was kind enough to read that book with me when I was interning at church a few years ago. And that's just that book is one of my all-time favorites. It's very, very impactful.
Yeah, it's a bit of a lost classic. I don't mean clearly a lot of people have read it, but I would say generationally, it's kind of lost impact.
Yeah.
It influenced those who influenced our current generation. We should probably reread it.
I think we should reread it. It's worthwhile. I just love watching J.I. Packer YouTube clips and I just really like that guy. So it was cool. I wanted to ask you about meeting him.
Yeah, I love those rare opportunities to meet consequential Christian men who are better than you anticipate them being.
Yeah.
Because speaking of being a recovering cynic, I learned to be fairly cynical about famous Christian people because they're fallen humans and they don't always live up to your hopes.
Sure,
but he did. He had the humility of Christ about him, and it just exuded, and he was awesome.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right. So, Hoping for Happiness. People can buy this on Amazon. Where can they buy it? Anywhere?
Christianbook.com, Lifeway.com, whatever.
And you are. They can just find you on the internets. And then you also have, you're doing a podcast, Happy Rant Podcast. Mm-hmm. People would want to check that out too.
It'd be fun if they did.
You do like an episode a week?
Yep, weekly episodes.
Okay.
And we don't have a set release day because we are coordinating multiple schedules, so we don't always record at the same time. But usually it's like midweek, Wednesday, Thursday.
I like that.
Yeah.
And it's good, by the way. For 3 guys that just turn on the mic and start talking, it's pretty great.
So yeah, sometimes we get done with an episode and go, oof, that was trash. but it does seem to keep working. And we still enjoy it, which is why we do it.
That's great. So Happy Rant Podcast, people can check you out there. Any other places they can check you out?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, and those are probably the easiest places to find me online.
Yeah, cool. Well, Barnabas, thanks for stopping by, man. Yeah. This was fantastic. And thank you again for serving Immanuel so well. And I hope this book sells a ton of copies. You just came out, right?
Yeah, about a week ago today, as of this recording.
All right. How are you feeling so far about the sales?
I don't know. Sales numbers don't come in for a while. So I was telling my wife, I was like, this feels weird because all I see is the positive comments on social media. So I feel really good about it.
Okay,
Very
good.
affirmed.
Yep.
But those might be all of the people who are aware of this book.
Sure.
So like if there's 300 tweets out there, it might be that's the 300 people who know about it. I don't know. We'll find out.
Yeah. Cool. All right, brother. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic.
That was fun.
Yeah, it was fun.